The sound of my sister's hand hitting my 10-month-old son's face is something I'll never forget. One second, we're at my parents' Christmas dinner, 20 people, crystal glasses, the perfect Hayes family tableau. The next, my baby is screaming, a bright red handprint blooming across his tiny cheek, and my sister Emily is shoving him back at me like he's garbage. "There," she says, cold as ice. "Maybe now you'll learn to control your child. You're completely overreacting." I look around that table at my mother, my father, aunts, uncles, cousins, waiting for someone, anyone to say something, to defend my baby, to acknowledge that a grown woman just struck an infant. Nothing. They all look down, like it didn't happen, like my son's cries are the problem, not the violence. That silence, that complicit, calculated silence, told me everything I needed to know about my family. And it told me I was about to lose them forever. But I didn't know that what happened next would expose secrets that had been buried for 20 years. I didn't know my sister's attack wasn't random. It was the explosion of a jealousy so deep it had turned her into someone dangerous. I didn't know that standing up to my family would uncover hidden wills, false police reports, and a kidnapping attempt that would land my sister in handcuffs. And I definitely didn't know that the person who would save me wasn't a lawyer or a judge, but my military commander husband who stood up from that table, looked my sister dead in the eye, and spoke 2 words that would change everything: "Get out." She never came back. But the war. That was just beginning. My name is Vanessa Hayes. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my life I've been a ghost in my own family. I work as a program director at a children's nonprofit in Northern California. I'm married to a wonderful man named Daniel, and 10 months ago, I became a mother to the most beautiful baby boy in the world. I thought becoming a mother would change how my family saw me, but as I pulled up to my parents' mansion that Christmas Eve, the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach told me nothing had changed at all. The Hayes estate looked like something out of a holiday magazine. White lights dripped from every eave, perfectly trimmed wreaths hung on double doors, and through the expansive windows I could see the glittering chandelier in the foyer. My mother, Patricia, had outdone herself this year as always. Perfection was the Hayes family brand, and we all had our assigned roles in maintaining it. Emily was the star. My parents were the proud benefactors, and me, I was the extra, the one who filled space in family photos, but never quite belonged in the frame. Daniel squeezed my hand as we got out of the car. "You okay?" he asked, already knowing the answer. My husband had been a military commander for 15 years, leading troops through impossible situations, but even he found my family exhausting. I nodded anyway, adjusting our son in his carrier, making sure his little outfit was perfect. If I was going to be criticized tonight, and I would be, at least it wouldn't be for dressing my baby poorly. The moment we walked in, I felt it. That familiar sensation of becoming smaller, quieter, less substantial. My mother swept past me with barely a glance. "Oh, Vanessa, you're here," before zeroing in on Emily, who had just descended the staircase like she was making a grand entrance at a gala. "Emily, darling, that dress is stunning. Is it the one we picked out in San Francisco?" My mother's voice carried that particular warmth she reserved exclusively for my younger sister, a tone I'd spent 35 years trying to earn and never quite achieving. Emily beamed, twirling to show off a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. At 30, she was still living off my parents' money, still launching businesses that folded within months, still being celebrated for participation, while I'd worked since I was 16 and received nothing but vague acknowledgments. "You like it, Mom. I wasn't sure about the color," Emily said, fishing for more compliments. She got them. My aunt rushed over, my cousins cooed their approval, and Emily soaked it in like sunlight. Meanwhile, I stood there holding a 10-month-old baby wearing a dress I'd bought on sale 3 years ago, waiting for someone to acknowledge my existence. Daniel, bless him, stayed close, his hand on my lower back, a steady presence in a room that had always made me feel like I was drowning. My father, Richard, finally noticed us, but only to extend his hand to Daniel. "Commander Reed, good to see you. How's the base?" They launched into a conversation about military logistics while I stood there invisible as always. No one asked about my recent promotion. No one asked how I was adjusting to motherhood. No one asked about the nonprofit successful fundraiser I'd organized last month. The 20-person gathering swirled around Emily's orbit, and I did what I'd always done. I smiled, I stayed quiet, and I pretended it didn't hurt. Dinner was a production, as always. The formal dining room gleamed with china and crystal place cards in calligraphy directing everyone to their assigned seats. I ended up between my uncle, who spent the entire first course talking to the person on his other side, and my cousin, who was glued to her phone. Daniel sat across from me, and I watched him take it all in. The way conversations flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream, the way Emily's mundane comments about her latest business idea received enthusiastic encouragement while my attempts to contribute were met with polite nods before someone changed the subject. Then my son started crying. He'd been so good sleeping in his carrier beside my chair, but he was 10 months old and it was past his bedtime, and the noise and lights were overwhelming. I immediately picked him up, bouncing him gently, trying to soothe him quietly. Normal baby behavior. Any parent would understand. But this wasn't a room full of understanding parents. This was a room full of people obsessed with appearances, and a crying baby was a blemish on the perfect Haze Christmas tableau. "Vanessa," my mother said, her voice tight with disapproval. "Perhaps you should take him to the other room." The implication was clear: you're disrupting the perfection. My aunt leaned over and stage whispered, "You know we always use nannies at this age. Makes events so much easier." The judgment pressed down on me from all sides. I was doing it wrong. I was always doing it wrong. I stood up ready to excuse myself to take my crying baby away from the people who found his very existence inconvenient. But before I could step away from the table, Emily's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Oh, for God's sake, just make him stop!" She was on her feet, face flushed red with an anger that seemed completely disproportionate to a baby's crying. Before I could process what was happening, she reached across the table and grabbed my son from my arms. Her grip was rough, jarring, and my baby's cries escalated to frightened screams. Then I saw her hand come up. Time seemed to slow down the way they say it does in moments of trauma. I saw her palm flying toward my son's face. I heard the sharp crack of contact. I watched my 10-month-old baby's head snap to the side from the force of it. The sound that came out of him wasn't crying anymore. It was a scream of pain and terror and confusion. A bright red mark bloomed across his soft, perfect cheek. Emily shoved him back at me, her face twisted with contempt. "There. Maybe now you'll learn to control your child. You're completely overreacting." I stood there, my baby screaming in my arms, staring at the woman who had just struck my infant son. My sister. My little sister who I'd protected from bullies when we were kids, who I'd helped with homework, who I'd loved despite everything. I looked around that table, my vision blurred with tears and shock. 20 people, 20 adults who had just witnessed a woman slap a baby across the face. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend her grandson. I looked at my father, waiting for him to stand up and demand Emily leave. Instead, my father cleared his throat and said quietly, "Emily's had a stressful year, Vanessa. Don't make a scene." My mother dabbed her napkin at her lips. "The baby's fine, dear. You always were so sensitive." Every single person at that table, aunts, uncles, cousins, family, friends, found something fascinating about their plates. No one looked at me. No one acknowledged what had just happened. It was like I was watching them collectively decide in real time that protecting Emily was more important than protecting a baby. In that moment, something broke inside me. Or maybe something finally healed. I understood with perfect, devastating clarity that my family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were dangerous. They would enable violence, abuse, cruelty, anything, rather than challenge Emily's perfection. The scraping of a chair broke the terrible silence. Daniel pushed back from the table, the sound echoing in the frozen room. He stood up slowly, deliberately, his military bearing making him seem to fill the entire space. but one person at that table refused to stay silent, and his voice would change everything. Daniel stood there for a moment, and the entire room seemed to shrink around him. My husband isn't a large man physically, but 15 years of commanding troops had given him something more powerful than size presence. The kind of authority that doesn't need to be loud to be absolute. Every eye in that dining room turned to him, and in the sudden silence, even my son's cries seemed to quiet. When Daniel spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and completely unyielding. It was the voice he used with subordinates who'd made critical errors, the voice that said there would be consequences and debate was not an option. "Emily, put down your fork. Stand up. Look at what you did." It wasn't a request. Emily's fork halfway to her mouth froze. For maybe the first time in her 30 years, someone was speaking to her without deference, without cushioning, without the protective padding our family always wrapped around her. She blinked confused as if she couldn't quite process being spoken to this way. What? The baby was being impossible. Vanessa wasn't handling. You struck an infant. Daniel's voice cut through her excuses like they were paper. You will leave this house immediately. The room exploded. My mother gasped and stood up, her hand pressed to her chest like Daniel had physically attacked her. Daniel, really, you're being dramatic. It was barely a tap. Emily would never. My father's voice boomed across the table, that authoritative tone he usually reserved for business negotiations. Son, you're new to this family. You don't understand how we handle things. We don't create unnecessary conflict over what? Daniel didn't raise his voice, but somehow it carried more weight than my father's bluster. Over assault. Over child abuse. What exactly are we not creating conflict over, Richard? Emily burst into tears, those practiced tears that had gotten her out of trouble her whole life. I barely touched him. Vanessa is manipulating everyone. She's always done this, always tried to make me look bad, because she's jealous that Mom and Dad actually love me. Stop talking. Daniel pulled out his phone, and with careful, deliberate movements, he photographed my son's face. The red mark on his cheek was still vivid, still visible, an angry handprint on skin that had never known violence until tonight. My baby had stopped screaming but was whimpering against my chest, and I could feel his little body trembling. It's 8:47 p.m. on December 24th. I'm documenting an assault on a minor. Emily Hayes struck my 10-month-old son across the face with enough force to leave visible marking. 20 witnesses present, none of whom intervened. My mother made a sound like she was choking. You can't be serious. Daniel, you're going to file a police report over a family disagreement. Over assault, Daniel repeated, and I watched him tap something on his phone screen. You have 5 minutes to decide. Either Emily leaves this house voluntarily right now, or I call the police and she leaves in handcuffs. Your choice. Part of me wanted to disappear into the floor. This was the Vanessa I'd always been, the one who absorbed hurt, who smoothed over conflict, who made myself smaller so everyone else could be comfortable. 35 years of conditioning screamed at me to stop this, to tell Daniel he was overreacting, to apologize to Emily and my parents and make it all go away. The words were already forming. Daniel, maybe we should just go. We don't need to make this bigger than it is. But then Daniel's hand touched my shoulder, gentle but grounding, and he said quietly, just for me. No, this is non-negotiable. Our son's safety isn't up for family vote. I looked down at my baby, at the mark on his face, at his wide, frightened eyes that kept darting to Emily like he knew even at 10 months old that she was dangerous. Something fundamental shifted in my chest. All my life, I'd been the peacemaker because I thought that's what good daughters, good sisters, good family members did. But I was a mother now, and mothers don't keep the peace at their children's expense. I straightened my spine. My voice shook when I spoke, but I forced the words out anyway. We're leaving. Emily needs to leave first. My father stared at me like I'd grown a second head. My mother looked between me and Emily, her face crumbling with confusion as if she couldn't understand why I wasn't folding, why I wasn't apologizing, why I wasn't slipping back into my assigned role of the accommodating one. Emily realized in that moment that no one was riding to her rescue. Not like usual. Not with Daniel standing there like an immovable wall and me refusing to back down. She grabbed her purse, her face shifting from tears to something uglier, pure, undiluted rage. "Fine." She spat the word like venom. "You've always been jealous of me, Vanessa. Always. And now you're using your baby to get attention because you know Mom and Dad will never love you the way they love me. Everyone sees right through you." She stormed toward the door, and my mother, who had barely acknowledged my son's injury, who hadn't held me or checked if I was okay, immediately followed. "Emily, sweetheart, wait. Let me make sure you're all right." Vanessa didn't mean... But Emily was already gone. The front door slamming behind her, hard enough to rattle the chandelier. My mother disappeared after her, leaving me standing in a dining room full of people who were suddenly very interested in their dessert plates. My father made one last attempt. His voice was quieter now, almost conciliatory. "Daniel, son, you're new to this family. We handle things privately here. Family business stays in the family." Emily didn't mean to actually hurt the baby. She's been under a lot of stress trying to get pregnant herself, and I think Vanessa's baby just triggered... She meant it. Daniel's voice was flat, final. "You all saw it. 20 people watched a woman strike an infant across the face, and every single one of you looked away. You chose to protect her image over protecting a child. That tells me everything I need to know about this family." He walked over and took my son from my arms with infinite gentleness, cradling him against his chest. Then he grabbed my coat and his and guided me toward the door with his free hand. I moved like I was underwater, my mind still trying to process what had just happened, what I'd just done. I'd chosen my son over my family. I'd stood up. I hadn't apologized. As we walked past the dining room, I heard my aunt's whisper meant to be heard. "That poor girl married such a controlling man. No wonder she's so paranoid about everything." The gaslighting was already starting. I wasn't a mother protecting her child. I was a paranoid wife with a controlling husband. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and I knew by tomorrow the whole family would believe some version where I was the problem, Emily was the victim, and Daniel was the villain. In the car, something inside me broke. Not broke, shattered. I started crying ugly, heaving sobs that I couldn't control. Daniel drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to squeeze my knee. He didn't tell me it was okay. He didn't try to minimize what had happened. He just drove. "We're not going home," he said quietly. "Not tonight. You need space." He pulled into a hotel parking lot, and I realized he was right. I couldn't go home yet. I couldn't walk into our house and pretend this was just another holiday dinner gone wrong. This was different. This was the moment I finally saw my family clearly, without the filter of hope or the delusion that they'd ever change. They would never choose me. They would never protect me. They would never see me as worthy of the love and defense they showered on Emily without question. But I had Daniel, and I had my son, and maybe for the first time in my life that was enough. But Emily's tears weren't from remorse, they were from rage. And within 24 hours the Hayes family would launch their counterattack. I woke up on Christmas morning to the sound of my phone vibrating against the hotel nightstand. Not just once or twice, but continuously, like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. Daniel was already up, sitting in the armchair by the window with our son feeding him a bottle while watching the sunrise. He looked at my phone and then at me with an expression that said he'd already checked his own messages. "How many?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying myself to sleep. 47 on yours, 32 on mine." I picked up my phone with shaking hands. The notifications were overwhelming. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, even Facebook messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I started reading them aloud, my voice growing more incredulous with each one. My mother. "You ruined Christmas. Emily cried all night. The whole family is upset. You need to call your sister and apologize. Another from her sent at 3 in the morning. I can't believe you would do this to us. On Christmas of all days. My father's texts were colder, more calculated. Your husband's behavior last night was completely unacceptable. Military rank doesn't give him the right to disrespect my daughter in my house. We need to discuss his anger issues. Then came the avalanche from extended family. My Aunt Carol. Emily made a mistake, but that's what families do. They forgive. You're blowing this way out of proportion. My Uncle James. That baby looks fine in the photos your mom showed me. Kids are resilient. Don't let your marriage problems destroy this family. A cousin I'd spoken to maybe twice in the last decade. I always knew you resented Emily's success. Using your baby as a weapon is low even for you. I kept reading each message a fresh knife wound. You've always been overdramatic. The baby wasn't even hurt. Daniel is clearly controlling you. Emily's devastated. How could you accuse her of something so horrible? Not a single message acknowledged what actually happened. Not one person said, "Are you okay?" or "Is the baby all right?" or even, "What Emily did was wrong, but..." They were all operating from the same script, the same narrative. I was the problem. Daniel was dangerous. Emily was the victim. They're not defending what she did, Daniel said quietly, his eyes on our son. They're denying it happened. Do you see the difference? That's not just enabling, that's institutional gaslighting. They've coordinated this. I looked at my baby peacefully finishing his bottle in his father's arms. The red mark on his cheek had faded to a slight pink, but I could still see exactly where Emily's hand had landed. And yet, according to my entire family, it had barely happened. Or it had happened, but didn't matter. Or it had happened, but I'd caused it by being a bad mother who couldn't control her crying child. If I back down now, I whispered, what am I teaching him? That abuse is okay if it keeps the peace. That family loyalty matters more than safety. Daniel didn't answer, but I didn't need him to. I already knew. The day after Christmas, I was home washing bottles when I heard a key in my front door. My stomach dropped. I'd completely forgotten my mother still had a key from the years when she'd water my plants when I traveled for work. Before I could react, she was inside carrying shopping bags full of expensive, wrapped gifts. "Vanessa, sweetheart, I wanted to check on my grandson," she said, her voice dripping with concern that felt rehearsed. She didn't wait for an invitation, just swept into my living room and started unpacking gifts. Designer baby clothes with tags still attached. Educational toys that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. A stuffed elephant so large it could barely fit in my son's nursery. "Mom, you can't just let yourself in." "I'm worried about you, honey. About the baby. I needed to see with my own eyes that you're both all right." She was using her concerned mother voice, but her eyes were scanning my house like she was looking for evidence of something. Evidence of what? That Daniel was controlling me. That I was unstable. She sat down on my couch without being asked and patted the cushion next to her. "We need to talk about Christmas Eve. Emily is devastated. She didn't mean to hurt the baby, she was just overwhelmed. She's been trying so hard to get pregnant, you know. Fertility treatments, multiple rounds of IVF. It's been destroying her emotionally. Seeing you with your baby, hearing him cry. Something in her just snapped. It wasn't rational, but it wasn't malicious either." I stood there, arms crossed, refusing to sit. "She hit my child, Mom." She tapped him, out of frustration. "It was wrong, yes, but Vanessa, you have to understand how much pain she's in. And then Daniel's reaction, threatening to call the police, that was so extreme. I hope he's not isolating you from your family. That's a warning sign of an abusive relationship, you know." The audacity of it took my breath away. My husband had defended our son from assault, and she was twisting it into abuse. Emily had struck a baby, and she was the one deserving of sympathy. "Emily has been crying for 2 days, my mother continued. She's devastated that you think she'd intentionally hurt a child. Your father is willing to move past Daniel's behavior if you'll just smooth this over, for the family. That's what families do, Vanessa. We forgive. Get out, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Excuse me. Get out of my house. Give me your key. For a moment, my mother's carefully constructed mask slipped. Her eyes went hard. Her mouth thinned into a line I'd seen directed at me my whole life, but never at Emily. You've always been difficult, Vanessa. Always had to make everything about you. Emily warned me, you know. She said you'd use this baby to finally get the attention you've always craved. I didn't want to believe her, but here you are creating this whole drama trying to destroy your sister's reputation because you're jealous of her. I can see it now. She stood, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door. She didn't leave the key. I heard her car pull away, and I sank onto the couch, shaking. In my mother's reality, I was simultaneously invisible and manipulative, unimportant and attention-seeking. The cognitive dissonance of it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. That evening, my phone chimed with an email. The subject line read, "Family Expectations Moving Forward." The sender was my father, but the formal legal language told me he'd had help drafting it, probably his business attorney. I read it 3 times, each time feeling colder. It outlined exactly what I needed to do: issue a public apology to Emily for causing unnecessary drama and making false accusations. Have Daniel apologize for threatening and aggressive behavior. Attend a family dinner on New Year's Eve where we would demonstrate reconciliation and family unity. The consequences for refusing were spelled out with chilling clarity: temporary removal from family events until such time as Vanessa is ready to participate constructively in family relationships. And this was the line that made my hands shake. Future inheritance considerations will be affected accordingly. They were threatening to cut me off. Financially. Socially. Completely. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open to that email, my baby sleeping peacefully upstairs with Daniel watching over him. I looked at my husband when he came downstairs. When did I become the bad guy for protecting my child? Daniel sat down across from me, his hands folded on the table. You're not the bad guy, Ash. They're just showing you who they really are. They've probably always been this way, but you wanted to believe they could be different. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I stared at that email, at the ultimatum, at the threat disguised as family expectations. For 35 years, I'd bent myself into whatever shape my family needed me to be. I'd apologized for existing, for taking up space, for having needs and feelings. I'd made myself small so Emily could be big. But I had a son now, and he was watching, learning, absorbing the lessons about what family meant, what love looked like, what you tolerated in the name of keeping the peace. I closed my laptop without responding. The next morning, a message arrived that would give me something my family never had proof. The call came the next morning from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer after 2 days of harassment from my family. Unknown numbers felt dangerous. But something made me pick up. Is this Vanessa Hayes? The woman's voice was older, careful, like she was testing whether it was safe to continue. Yes. Who is this? My name is Margaret Torres. You don't know me, but I knew your sister. 8 years ago, I was the administrative director at Little Sprouts Preschool, where Emily worked briefly. She paused, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I saw her name in a comment section yesterday, just a local news article about the Winter Festival, and it brought back memories I've been carrying for a long time. Then I looked at your social media. We have some mutual friends, and I've been following your posts. Your Christmas message was deleted and replaced with something vague about family being complicated. Then Emily posted about dealing with family drama. I had a very bad feeling. My heart was pounding. What do you mean you knew Emily? Your sister was fired from our preschool. She hit a child, a 3-year-old boy. We documented everything: incident reports, witness statements, and we had audio from our classroom monitoring system. It was clear-cut assault. Margaret's voice cracked. Your father paid us $50,000 to destroy the evidence and sign non-disclosure agreements. But I kept a copy. I couldn't destroy proof that a child abuser might hurt someone else someday. I've regretted not coming forward for 8 years. When I saw those posts, I thought maybe she'd done it again. I couldn't breathe. She hit my son. On Christmas Eve. She slapped him across the face. Margaret made a sound like a sob. I was afraid of that. I have the recording, Vanessa. I have the incident reports and the settlement documents. I'm violating my NDA by telling you this, but I don't care anymore. Some secrets protect predators. You have a baby to protect. I can send you everything. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Yes, please, send it. 20 minutes later, Daniel and I sat together on the couch, my laptop between us, staring at the encrypted email Margaret had sent. The subject line was simple: the truth about Emily Hayes. My finger hovered over the attachment for a long moment before I clicked. The audio file loaded. For the first few seconds, there was just ambient noise, children playing a teacher's voice reading a story in the background. Then I heard crying. A child maybe 3 years old, that hiccuping sob that little kids do when they're tired or overwhelmed. Emily's voice came next, tight with irritation. "Stop it! Stop crying right now!" The child cried harder. "I said stop!" Emily's voice escalated, that edge of fury I recognized from Christmas Eve. "You're doing this on purpose. Stop crying." Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a slap, sharp and violent. The child's cry turned into a scream of pain and terror. "I said stop crying!" Emily shouted. Another voice, female, younger. "Emily, what did you— Oh my God, what did you do?" Scuffling sounds, a door slamming. Then more voices, adults talking over each other. An administrator. "Emily, you need to tell me what happened." Emily alternating between denial and justification. "I didn't do anything. He's lying. He wouldn't listen. He was being defiant. Kids need discipline. I barely touched him." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, Emily being confronted, escorted from the building, the child's parents being called. I listened to all of it, tears streaming down my face, Daniel's arm around my shoulders. When it ended, I opened the incident report. Clinical language describing what the teacher had witnessed. Employee Emily Hayes struck student JM across the left arm with sufficient force to leave a visible handprint. Student was crying prior to contact, but was not engaging in dangerous or aggressive behavior. Student appeared terrified following the incident. Employee showed no remorse and insisted the child had provoked her response. The recommendation was clear. Report to State Licensing Board and local police department. Employee is not suitable for work with children. But that's not what happened. Instead, there was a legal settlement dated 2 weeks after the incident. Hayes Holdings, LLC. My father's company had paid Little Sprouts Educational Center $50,000. In exchange, termination of Emily Hayes will be recorded as without cause rather than for cause. All video and audio evidence of the incident will be destroyed. All staff members present will sign non-disclosure agreements. No reports will be filed with licensing boards or law enforcement. The document was signed by Richard Hayes in his bold, authoritative handwriting. I read it 3 times, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. My father knew. 8 years ago, he knew Emily had hit a child, and instead of getting her help, instead of facing the reality of what she'd done, he'd paid to bury it. He'd paid to protect her reputation and enable her to continue being dangerous. "This is a pattern," I whispered. "It's not a one-time thing. It's not stress or fertility issues or a momentary lapse. She hurts children when she loses control, and my family covers it up." Daniel was already on his phone forwarding the files to someone. "I'm sending this to a lawyer friend of mine. This changes everything, Ash. This is documented evidence of prior violence and a cover-up conspiracy." Another email arrived from Margaret longer this time. I opened it with shaking hands. She explained that she and my mother had been friends years before the incident. They'd served together on a hospital charity board, had coffee occasionally, moved in similar social circles. When Emily applied to work at Little Sprouts despite having minimal qualifications and no real interest in early childhood education, Margaret had hired her as a favor to Patricia. After the incident, Margaret wanted to report Emily to Child Protective Services and the State Licensing Board. She wanted that child protected and future children warned. But the preschool owner, a man named David Chen who'd built his small business from nothing and couldn't afford a legal battle with the Hayes family, told her she had a choice: sign the NDA or lose her job. Richard's lawyers had made it clear they would destroy the preschool's reputation, tie them up in lawsuits for years, and ensure no one in the community ever trusted them with children again. Margaret signed. She kept her job, and she'd hated herself for it every day since. But there was something else in the email, something that made my skin crawl. "Your mother called me privately after the settlement was finalized," Margaret wrote. "It was late at night and I could tell she'd been drinking. She asked me to watch out for you for Vanessa. She said Vanessa doesn't know how hard it is to be the pretty, perfect sister. She doesn't understand what that kind of jealousy can do to a person. At the time, I thought she was just rambling, maybe feeling guilty about the whole situation. But now I think she was trying to warn me. I think your mother has always known Emily is dangerous, especially to you, but she's never had the power or the courage to stop it." The email ended with, "I'm violating my NDA by sending you this. I could be sued. I don't care anymore. Some secrets protect predators. You have a baby to protect. Use it. And if you need me to testify, to go on record, to do whatever it takes, I will. I should have been brave 8 years ago. Let me be brave now." I closed my laptop and looked at Daniel. My entire family has been covering up Emily's violence for at least 8 years, probably longer. My mother knew I might be in danger and did nothing. My father actively paid to hide evidence. And they're all acting like I'm the problem for not accepting another family dinner where we pretend none of this happened. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You have proof now. Real, documented, undeniable proof. The question is what you're going to do with it." But while I was discovering Emily's past, Emily was busy constructing my future, and it involved Child Protective Services. 2 days after Margaret's call, I woke up to my phone exploding with notifications. Not from my family this time, from Facebook, from Instagram, from people I'd gone to high school with, former co-workers, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. I opened Instagram first, and my stomach dropped. Emily had posted a photo of herself looking devastated, perfect makeup with just enough smudging to suggest tears sitting on what looked like a therapist's couch, natural light streaming in to give her an ethereal, vulnerable glow. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. Sometimes standing up for yourself means protecting yourself from toxic family members. I'm heartbroken to share that my sister and her husband have been making false accusations against me because they're uncomfortable with my success. I'm being scapegoated for normal family disagreements. To everyone who's asked if I'm okay, I'm not. But I will be. Narcissistic family members thrive on making themselves the victim. I'm choosing to protect my peace. Below the photo were hashtags: toxic family setting, boundaries, narcissistic abuse, self-care, healing, journey, toxic siblings. The post had been up for 3 hours and already had over 400 comments. I scrolled through them, each one a punch to the gut. "You're so brave for sharing this. I always knew something was off about your sister. Stay strong, Emily. Don't let them gaslight you." A woman I'd never met wrote, "I could tell she was jealous of you at that charity event last year. The way she looked at you, pure envy." Someone from my high school. "Vanessa was always weird and attention-seeking. Remember when she claimed she broke her arm falling down the stairs? But everyone knew she was just clumsy and wanted sympathy." I stared at that comment. I had broken my arm falling down the stairs when I was 7. What I'd never told anyone outside my immediate family was that Emily had pushed me. And here was someone rewriting even that memory, turning my injury into evidence of attention-seeking behavior. Emily's narrative was spreading like wildfire. 3,000 followers meant 3,000 people who now saw me as the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. The toxic sister, the narcissist, the jealous one making false accusations. I kept scrolling, unable to stop, even though every comment made me feel sicker. Praying for you, Emily. Family trauma is so hard. Your sister sounds like a nightmare. That's emotional abuse. You should go no contact. My hands were shaking. I looked up to find Daniel reading over my shoulder, his jaw tight. This is character assassination, I said, my voice hollow. She's convincing everyone that I'm the abuser. Daniel took my phone gently from my hands. Let me handle this. He was already moving, pulling out his laptop, opening his own phone. I watched him screenshot Emily's post, scroll through the comments, document everything with methodical precision. What are you doing? Building a case. Every post, every comment, it's all evidence of a coordinated harassment campaign. He pulled up his contacts. I'm calling a lawyer I know from my JAG days, Jennifer Martinez. She specializes in family law and she's brilliant. She'll know how to counter this. Wait, you should stay off social media completely. Daniel said, his tone brooking no argument. It was his commander voice, the one that expected compliance. Don't respond, don't engage, don't give them any ammunition they can twist. Let me handle this. Part of me was grateful. I was drowning, and Daniel was throwing me a lifeline. But another part of me, quieter, felt like I was being sidelined from my own fight. I'd been planning to research lawyers today, to make calls to take control of my own defense. But Daniel was already 3 steps ahead, making decisions without asking what I wanted. I want to post something, I said. To tell my side. That's exactly what they want. Daniel's eyes were kind but firm. They'll screenshot it, dissect it, use every word against you. The best move is silence. Let them scream into the void while we build a real case. I opened my mouth to argue, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. Maybe he was right. Maybe I needed to let someone else take the lead for once. I'd spent 35 years fighting for scraps of recognition from my family. Maybe it was okay to let my husband fight for me now. That evening, Daniel announced he'd scheduled a consultation with Jennifer Martinez for January 2nd. She's available via Zoom. I've already sent her the recording Margaret provided and given her a summary of what happened at Christmas. You hired her already. The words came out sharper than I intended. Without asking me. Daniel looked surprised. I thought you'd be relieved. She's the best Ash. I know these situations, the best defense is a strong offense. Trust me. I do trust you. But this is my family, my choice. I'd like to be part of picking my own lawyer. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, hurt maybe, or frustration. Of course. I was just trying to help. I'm sorry. He reached for my hand. You've been through hell. I thought taking this off your plate would help. But you're right. It's your decision. Jennifer's willing to consult, but you don't have to hire her if you don't want to. The tension dissolved, but something about it stuck with me. The way Daniel had assumed I'd want him to take over. The way he'd made decisions for me, even with good intentions. I pushed the discomfort away. I was being ungrateful. My husband was protecting me. That's what love looked like. On New Year's Eve, just as I was putting my son to bed, an Instagram notification appeared. A message from an account I didn't recognize, no profile picture, obviously fake name created that day. You're a terrible mother. Everyone knows it. CPS should take your baby before you hurt him. The words hit me like ice water. Specific. Threatening. Calculated to terrify. I showed Daniel immediately. His face darkened. Block them. Report them. Better yet, make your account private. Don't give them any access to you. As I followed his instructions, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I answered, my heart pounding. Vanessa. Richard's voice was cold, controlled. I hear you've hired a lawyer. That's unfortunate. We could have resolved this privately as a family. Now you've made this a legal issue. Emily hit my child, Dad. That's a legal issue. Emily made a mistake in a moment of stress. You're destroying this family over nothing. I hope you're prepared for what escalation means. His tone shifted, became almost conciliatory. We've always taken care of you, Vanessa. Don't make me stop. My breath caught. What does that mean? It means I'm giving you one more chance to be reasonable. Apologize to your sister. Acknowledge that Daniel overreacted. Commit to family loyalty. That's all we've ever asked from you, Vanessa. Just loyalty. To who? To you. To Emily. What about loyalty to my son? Your son is fine. You're being paranoid. But if you continue down this path, if you insist on making this public and legal and dramatic, you'll find out exactly what this family is capable of protecting. Think about that. He hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, Daniel watching me with concern. What did he say? He threatened me. I don't know what exactly, but it was a threat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I held my son, watching him breathe in the darkness, thinking about Margaret's recording, about Emily's social media campaign, about my father's ominous warning. I had evidence of Emily's violence. But would anyone believe me against the Hayes family's money and influence? Vanessa didn't know that her father's call wasn't a threat. It was a distraction. Because Emily had already set a trap that would arrive at Vanessa's door in 10 days. 10 days after my father's cryptic threat on a Friday morning in early January, the trap Emily had set finally sprang. Daniel had left for the base an hour earlier. I was in the kitchen feeding my son breakfast, spooning mashed banana into his eager mouth while he babbled happily and grabbed at the spoon. It was one of those perfect domestic moments that made all the chaos of the past 2 weeks feel manageable. My baby was safe, healthy, loved. That's what mattered. Then came the knock. Firm. Official. The kind of knock that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I wiped banana off my son's face and went to the door, peering through the peephole. A woman in business casual clothing stood on my porch, a leather portfolio under her arm, an official-looking badge clipped to her belt. When I opened the door, she held up the badge. Mrs. Reed, I'm Sandra Chen from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of concern regarding the welfare of a child at this address. May I come in? The world tilted. CPS. Someone had called CPS on me. I knew immediately who it was, had to be Emily, but the knowledge didn't make the panic any less consuming. My hands started shaking. Sandra Chen was watching me, cataloging my reaction, and I knew that showing fear would be used against me somehow. Yes, of course. I stepped back, my voice surprisingly steady, even though I felt like I might throw up. What is this about? Sandra walked in, her eyes already scanning my living room. I tried to see it through her eyes. Toys scattered on the floor, a basket of unfolded laundry on the couch, breakfast dishes in the sink. Normal mess of a house with a baby. But was it too messy? Too clean would look obsessive. Too dirty would look neglectful. There was no winning. We received a report alleging concerns about your parenting. Sandra said, her tone neutral but not unkind. The report states that you display erratic behavior, leave the baby crying for extended periods, and may be suffering from untreated postpartum depression that makes you a danger to your child. Each word was a knife. That's not true. None of that is true. I'm not here to adjudicate family disputes, ma'am. I'm here to ensure child safety. Sandra pulled out a tablet. I need to see where the baby sleeps, what food you have available, ask some questions about your support system. This is standard procedure. I led her through the house in a daze. She photographed the nursery, the crib with its clean sheets, the changing table stocked with diapers and wipes, the bookshelf full of board books. She opened my refrigerator and cabinets, noting the formula baby food, fresh produce. She watched my son in his high chair, observed how he reached for me when I came near, how he smiled and babbled. He seems healthy and well-adjusted, Sandra said, making notes. Can you tell me about your support system, family, nearby friends who help with childcare? This was where it got dangerous. My husband is very supportive. I have neighbors who help, but my family and I are currently estranged. Why is that? I took a breath. My sister assaulted my son at a family gathering on Christmas Eve. She slapped him across the face. I have photos of the injury witness testimony and we're pursuing legal action. I believe she filed this report in retaliation. Sandra's expression didn't change. That's a serious allegation. I have proof. I have medical documentation photos taken immediately after and a recording of my sister assaulting another child years ago. My father paid $50,000 to cover it up. Mrs. Reed, I understand you're upset, but making accusations about who filed the report won't help your case. Sandra's voice had cooled slightly. CPS reports are confidential, and frankly, families often accuse each other of filing reports during custody disputes. This isn't a custody dispute. My sister doesn't have any legal claim to my child. She hurt him, and I reported it. Sandra made another note, and I watched my own words being used against me. Paranoid ideation. Unfounded accusations against family members. I could practically see her writing it. She asked me to put the baby down for a moment so we could talk privately. My hands shook as I placed him in his playpen with some toys. He immediately started playing happy and oblivious. Sandra reviewed her file, and I caught glimpses of the allegations. The language was careful, clinical, devastating. Child frequently appears distressed in mother's care. Mother isolated from family support systems by controlling partner. Mother makes unfounded accusations against family members. Family attempted intervention, but mother became defensive and hostile. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Every piece had a grain of truth twisted into poison. Yes, I'd been distant from family because they enabled my sister's violence. Yes, Daniel was protective because he was defending us. Yes, I'd made accusations because they were true. But in Emily's version, filtered through this official report, I was unstable, paranoid, dangerous to my own child. Has anyone in your family expressed concern about your mental health? Sandra asked. The question was a trap with no safe answer. If I said yes, I validated their claims that I was unstable. If I said no, I was lying. Sandra probably had statements from my family already. I chose truth. My family has always told me I'm too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional. They minimize my feelings and gaslight me. That's why I'm setting boundaries. Not because I'm unstable, but because I'm finally healthy enough to recognize abuse. Sandra nodded, her expression unreadable. I see a clean home, a healthy child, and a mother who appears engaged and responsive. But I have to investigate all allegations thoroughly. My report will be filed within the week, and a determination will be made within 30 days. You should expect a follow-up visit. What happens if the determination is negative? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Sandra stood gathering her things. I recommend you document your childcare routines. Keep regular pediatrician appointments. And consider getting a mental health evaluation to demonstrate you're proactive about wellness. The suggestion made my blood run cold. Get evaluated and risk a diagnosis being weaponized against me, or refuse and look like I was hiding something. But I nodded. I'll do whatever you need. After Sandra left, I stood in my living room holding my baby, my whole body shaking. I called Daniel with trembling fingers. He answered on the first ring. CPS just left. Emily called CPS on me. I'm coming home. Don't say anything else on the phone. He arrived 30 minutes later with a woman I'd never met, petite, sharp-eyed, wearing a power suit that screamed competence. Jennifer Martinez, the lawyer Daniel had consulted without me. Who filed the report? Jennifer asked before she'd even fully sat down. It had to be Emily. The timing, the specific allegations, it's all designed to make me look unstable. Jennifer's eyes gleamed. CPS reports are supposed to be confidential, but if we can prove Emily filed a false report as retaliation for you reporting her assault, that's a crime. Filing a false CPS report is a misdemeanor in California. Combined with the Christmas assault and the preschool incident, we're building a pattern. This might actually backfire on her. For the first time since Sandra Chen knocked on my door, I felt a tiny spark of hope. But I had no idea that uncovering Emily's motive would reveal a pain so deep, I'd almost feel sorry for her sister. Almost. Jennifer Martinez didn't waste time. The day after the CPS visit, she suggested hiring a private investigator to dig into Emily's life, her finances, her activities, anything that might establish motive for filing a false report. If we can show she filed out of malice, jealousy, or desperation, rather than genuine concern, it strengthens our case significantly, Jennifer explained. Motive matters. I hesitated at the cost, but Daniel was already pulling out his credit card. Whatever it takes. 48 hours later, Jennifer called us back to her office. The private investigator, a woman named Carol Reeves, who looked more like a librarian than someone who uncovered people's secrets, had compiled a 20-page report. She slid it across the desk to us, her expression carefully neutral. "Your sister isn't just jealous," Carol said. "She's desperate." I opened the report to the financial summary and my breath caught. Emily was $180,000 in debt. The breakdown made my stomach turn. $95,000 in fertility treatment loans, 5 IVF cycles over 3 years, every single one ending in failure. $42,000 in credit card debt. The statements showing purchases at high-end retailers, expensive restaurants, the designer clothes and curated lifestyle she displayed on social media. $28,000 owed to a business partner from a wellness boutique that had folded after 6 months. $15,000 in personal loans from friends who probably believed her stories about temporary cash flow problems. She posts constantly about gratitude and manifesting abundance, Carol said, but she's drowning. The fertility treatments alone wiped out her savings. The failed business venture buried her. And she's been maintaining this facade of success while taking out payday loans to make minimum payments on credit cards. I stared at the medical records Carol had obtained through a former clinic employee who'd been concerned enough about Emily's mental state to provide documentation. 5 IVF cycles. 5 times Emily had gone through the hormone injections, the egg retrievals, the agonizing 2-week waits. 5 times she'd seen negative pregnancy tests while watching other women in the waiting room celebrate positive ones. The psychological evaluations attached to each cycle showed a progressive decline. Cycle 1. Patient is optimistic and well-adjusted. Cycle 3. Patient showing signs of depression and anxiety related to treatment. Recommend counseling support. Cycle 5. Patient exhibits obsessive ideation regarding pregnancy. Difficulty accepting treatment failure. Strong recommendation for psychological intervention before attempting additional cycles. But what made me physically ill was the incident report from 6 months ago dated June 2024. Emily had gone to her fertility clinic for what would be her final visit. The 5th IVF cycle had failed. According to the nurse who filed the report, Emily had been sitting in the waiting room when a pregnant woman walked in for a routine checkup. The woman was clearly expecting maybe 7 or 8 months along, glowing with that 3rd trimester exhaustion and joy. Emily snapped. The nurse's description was clinical, but chilling. Patient began screaming at pregnant woman, calling her ungrateful, demanding to know what makes her deserve a baby when others can't have one. Patient had to be physically restrained by security. Other patients were frightened. Pregnant woman was shaken but unharmed. Patient was escorted from building and banned from returning. The clinic psychologist's follow-up note was even more disturbing. Patient displays obsessive ideation regarding pregnancy and motherhood. Exhibits inappropriate anger toward fertile women and pregnant patients. Patient appears to view pregnancy as a zero-sum competition, where others' success represents her failure. Strong recommendation for intensive therapy before considering any future fertility treatment. Patient refused referral, became hostile when intervention was suggested, and demanded all records be transferred to another facility immediately. I read it twice, my hands shaking. 6 months before Emily slapped my son at Christmas dinner, she'd been banned from a fertility clinic for screaming at a pregnant stranger. This wasn't a one-time breakdown. This was a pattern of escalating violence directed at anything that reminded her of what she couldn't have. "I think I understand now," I said quietly. "Why she hit my baby. It wasn't really about him crying or me being a bad mother. It was about me having what she desperately wants and can never have." Daniel squeezed my hand. "Understanding motive doesn't excuse assault." "I know, but it makes it sadder somehow." Sadder. And Jennifer flipped to another section of the report. "There's more. The financial desperation connects to your family in ways you need to understand." Carol had obtained emails between Emily and our father, legally questionable methods I decided not to ask about. The correspondence painted a disturbing picture of manipulation on both sides. Emily, 3 months ago. "Dad, I need another $20K. The business is about to turn around, but I need capital. Just advance it from my inheritance. I'll pay you back." Richard's response: "We'll discuss it at Thanksgiving. You need to prove you're being responsible with money first." Emily, 6 weeks ago. "Dad, please, I'm drowning here. You promised I'd be taken care of. Just tell me how much my inheritance is, and I'll work backward from there." Richard: "Your grandfather's estate is complicated. We'll handle it when the time comes. For now, focus on getting your life together." Emily, 2 weeks before Christmas. "I need to know what I'm getting. I've made financial decisions based on your promises. Don't leave me hanging." Richard: "We'll see what we can do." Jennifer tapped the emails. "Your father has been stringing Emily along for years, implying she's owed a substantial inheritance, but never committing to an amount. She's been borrowing against money she believes is coming. She's built her entire financial strategy around an inheritance that may not exist or may not be hers." The implications crashed over me. If Grandfather William's will leaves everything to me, Emily loses everything. Not just the inheritance, her entire financial plan collapses. "Exactly," Jennifer said. "Which means her attack on you isn't just emotional revenge. It's existential. If you're discredited as an unfit mother, if your reputation is destroyed, if you're alienated from the family, she can argue she's the responsible one who deserves the inheritance. Your father might even be encouraging this dynamic." I thought about my father's threat on New Year's Eve. Future inheritance considerations will be affected. He'd been dangling money in front of both of us, playing us against each other, maintaining control through calculated ambiguity. Emily wasn't just jealous of my baby. She was terrified that my baby represented her complete financial ruin. Every fertility treatment, every designer outfit, every business venture she'd funded with borrowed money, it all depended on an inheritance my father had implied she'd receive, but never guaranteed. "This is about money control, jealousy, and 30 years of dysfunction all coming to a head," I said. "Yes," Jennifer agreed. "And it's about to get worse. Because if there's a disputed will out there, your father knows about it, and he's not going to give up control without a fight. And that war was about to reveal a weapon I didn't even know existed, a document my grandfather had hidden for years, waiting for exactly this moment." The morning after learning about Emily's financial desperation, Margaret Torres called again. "Vanessa, I need to tell you something I've been carrying for years." Her voice was hesitant, heavy with guilt. "I knew your mother before the preschool incident, before Emily. We were actually close friends once." I sat down at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold in my hands. "I didn't know that. We met through charity work about 25 years ago when you were maybe 10 years old. We both served on the hospital foundation board. Your mother was different then, warmer, more confident. We bonded over feeling overshadowed by louder, more assertive women in our social circle." Margaret's voice softened with something like mourning. "But I watched it happen, Vanessa. I watched your father systematically dismantle her." "What do you mean?" "He'd criticize her decisions in front of other people. Make jokes about her opinions being cute or naive. He controlled all the finances Patricia had to ask permission to spend money even on herself. If she disagreed with him at a dinner party, he'd talk over her or correct her like she was a child. By the time Emily was born, Patricia had learned to defer to Richard on everything, especially parenting. I remember once she tried to tell him he was being too hard on you about something, maybe a B on a report card, and he said in front of everyone at a fundraiser that Patricia was too emotional to understand academic standards. She never contradicted him again in public. I thought about my mother, her careful silence at family dinners, the way she'd look at my father before answering any question, how she'd parrot his opinions as if they were her own. I'd always seen it as complicity. But maybe it was survival. "I'm not excusing what she's done to you," Margaret continued quickly. "She perpetuated abuse onto you that was done to her. That's not okay. But I wanted you to understand she's a victim too. A victim who victimized her own daughter because she was too afraid to fight back. Why are you telling me this now? Because there's something else you need to know, and I want you to understand the context first." Margaret took a shaky breath. "Your mother has been sending you money for years, or rather sending money for your son. What I haven't received anything from her. Not directly. There's an education fund in your son's name. Patricia opened it the week after he was born. She's been depositing $500 every month anonymously." My hands went numb. "How do you know this?" "Because I helped her set it up. She came to me terrified, asking if I knew a lawyer who could create a trust that Richard couldn't trace. She was adamant he couldn't know. I connected her with someone who helped her establish it using money from a small inheritance her own mother had left her years ago, the only money Richard didn't control. She's been funneling it to your son month by month." I pulled up my laptop with shaking hands and searched for accounts in my son's name. And there it was. An education trust I'd never noticed, established 3 days after his birth. Current balance $5,000. Monthly deposits of $500 like clockwork from an anonymous donor that I now knew was my mother. Tears blurred my vision. She's been trying to protect him, in secret, in the only way she could. "She called me after Christmas," Margaret said softly. She was sobbing. She said Emily went too far this time, but Richard won't let me say anything. "Vanessa, I think your mother wants to help you. She's just terrified of what it will cost her." I didn't know what to feel. Anger that my mother's help had been secret and insufficient. Grief for the mother I might have had if my father hadn't broken her. Strange, complicated gratitude that she'd tried to protect my son even while failing to protect me. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something your mother told me years ago at a charity gala. She'd had too much wine and started talking about your grandfather, William. She said he never liked how Richard treated you. He tried to intervene multiple times, came to the house, confronted your father, threatened to cut him off financially if he didn't treat you better. But Richard would freeze him out, stop taking his calls, keep the grandchildren away until William backed down. I didn't know that. My grandfather had always been kind to me, but I'd thought it was just generic grandparent affection, not active advocacy. Patricia said William changed his will specifically because he was worried about what would happen to you. She remembered the exact words he said to her. "Patricia, if you won't protect Vanessa, I will. But she'll have to prove she's strong enough to stand up to Richard first. Otherwise, the money will just be another chain binding her to this family." The words hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather hadn't just wanted to help me, he'd wanted to force me to save myself. He'd known that giving me money while I was still enmeshed in the family's dysfunction would just give my father another tool to control me. So he'd made it conditional. I had to be strong enough to break free before I could claim it. "I didn't understand what he meant then," Margaret continued. "But watching what you've done, standing up to your family, protecting your son, refusing to back down, I think you've passed his test. Your mother thought so too. Did she tell you anything else about the will? Just that there's a lawyer, someone your grandfather trusted more than the family attorney. Someone who's been holding documents for years waiting for the right moment. Patricia made me promise that if you ever needed help, if you ever stood up to Richard, I'd give you the name." She paused. "His name is Thomas Blackwell." I wrote it down with trembling hands. "Thank you, Margaret, for keeping the recording. For this, For everything. I should have been braver 8 years ago. Let me be brave now by giving you the tools to fight. She hesitated. Vanessa, your mother isn't the enemy. She's just been his prisoner longer than you have. Maybe she'll finally find the courage to escape too. After we hung up, I sat staring at the name on my notepad. Thomas Blackwell. A lawyer who'd been waiting for 5 years, holding secrets about my grandfather's will, watching to see if I'd become strong enough to claim what was mine. I picked up my phone and searched for his law office. The listing showed a distinguished estate attorney who'd practiced for over 40 years, specializing in complex family trusts and inheritance disputes. I dialed before I could second-guess myself. The receptionist answered on the second ring. Blackwell Estate Law. My name is Vanessa Hayes. I was told Thomas Blackwell might be expecting my call. There was a pause then. Please hold, Mrs. Reed. Less than 30 seconds later, a man's voice came on the line, warm and knowing. Vanessa, I was wondering when you'd find me. Your grandfather said you'd call when you were ready. It appears he was right. Thomas Blackwell had been waiting 5 years for my call. And what he had to tell me would change everything I thought I knew about my family. 2 days later, Daniel and I sat in Thomas Blackwell's office in downtown Sacramento. The space was exactly what I'd expected from a man who'd practiced estate law for 40 years, walls lined with leather-bound legal volumes, mahogany furniture that had probably been in the same spots for decades, and windows overlooking the city with heavy velvet curtains pulled back to let in winter sunlight. Thomas Blackwell stood when we entered, and I saw immediately why Margaret had trusted him. He had kind eyes, the sort that had seen decades of family drama, and still maintained compassion. He was maybe 75, with silver hair and a crisp suit that suggested old money discretion. Vanessa. He came around his desk and took my hand in both of his. You look just like him. Same stubborn chin. William would be proud you called. The familiarity startled me. You knew my grandfather well. For 30 years. He was more than a client, he was a friend. Thomas gestured for us to sit. I've been monitoring your situation from afar. Not invasively, I want to be clear, but attentively. Your grandfather left very specific instructions about when I was permitted to contact you. What kind of instructions? Thomas settled into his chair, steepling his fingers. I was to reach out only under certain conditions if you demonstrated independence from your father by initiating legal action to protect yourself or your children, or if 5 years passed since William's death, whichever came first. When you hired Jennifer Martinez, she ran a routine background check on the Hayes family as part of building your case. My name appeared in connection with your grandfather's estate. She called me 3 days ago. The timing is perfect, you've met the condition. My heart was pounding. What condition exactly? Thomas pulled a leather portfolio from a locked drawer in his desk. The leather was aged but well-maintained, embossed with my grandfather's initials. What your father filed with the probate court 5 years ago was a fabricated will. Oh, it was legal enough, properly witnessed, properly executed, but it wasn't the one William actually wanted followed. My father created a fake will. Daniel leaned forward. Not exactly fake, strategically incomplete. William anticipated Richard might suppress the true will, so we created 2 documents. The first was a decoy, a simple will leaving everything to my children to distribute equitably. Vague enough to give Richard legal cover to do whatever he wanted. The second was the real will held exclusively by me with very specific instructions. Thomas opened the portfolio. This is the will William Hayes actually wanted executed. He slid the document across the desk. It was thick, maybe 30 pages, with my grandfather's signature on multiple pages. I recognized his handwriting immediately, the same careful script he'd used to write me birthday cards. William's estate is substantial, Thomas said. The Hayes family mansion currently valued at $2.8 million. Hayes Holdings LLC, a small but profitable investment firm with approximately $4 million in managed assets. the William Hayes Charitable Foundation with $1.5 million in endowment, various accounts, properties, and investments totaling another $1.2 million. In total, nearly $10 million in assets. I couldn't breathe. $10 million. My grandfather had been wealthy, but I hadn't realized the extent. Thomas continued reading from the will. The entirety of my estate shall be held in trust administered by Thomas Blackwell for the benefit of my granddaughter Vanessa Hayes, born Vanessa Marie Hayes. Distribution of assets to Vanessa shall occur when she demonstrates the following conditions have been met. He looked up at me. There were 3 conditions, Vanessa. First, financial independence from Richard Hayes for a period of at least 12 months, evidenced by separate banking accounts, and no financial support received. I've been financially independent since I got married 7 years ago, I said. Daniel and I have never taken money from my father. Condition 1 met. Thomas made a note. Second condition, legal action taken to protect her interests or the interests of her children against family members, evidencing her willingness to prioritize safety over family approval. The CPS case. And we're considering charges against Emily for assault. Condition 2 met. Another note. Third condition, the beneficiary must be married or in a stable partnership, demonstrating she has built her own family support system outside the Hayes family dysfunction. Daniel squeezed my hand. Married 6 years. Condition 3 met. Thomas looked at me with something like pride. Vanessa, the estate is yours. Everything. Your father has been operating as if he controls it for 5 years, but legally he never did. The moment you initiated legal action to protect your son, you triggered the transfer of assets. The room spun. But why would my grandfather make it so complicated? Why all the conditions? Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression softening with memory. Do you remember coming to him about 6 years ago asking to borrow money for your wedding? I nodded. He gave me $15,000. He said it was a gift, not a loan. After you left that day, William called me to his house. He was agitated, upset. He said, Thomas, I just watched my granddaughter apologize for needing help paying for her own wedding. She apologized to me, the one person in her family who actually loves her, because her father has conditioned her to believe she doesn't deserve anything. He was crying, Vanessa. This man who never showed emotion was crying over you. Tears blurred my vision. He told me he'd been watching for years, watching Richard control Patricia, watching Emily become entitled and cruel, but mostly watching you try desperately to earn love from people incapable of giving it. He said, Vanessa will spend her whole life trying to fix this family unless someone forces her to walk away. I'm giving her a reason to leave and the means to survive without them, but she has to be brave enough to break free first. Otherwise, the money will just be another chain. I was openly crying now. He knew I'd never leave on my own. He knew abused children often return to their abusers because leaving feels impossible. So he gave you a financial foundation, but only if you proved you could stand on it. The conditions weren't tests you could fail, Vanessa. They were milestones he knew you'd eventually reach. He was just making sure you couldn't claim the inheritance while still trapped in the family's dysfunction. Daniel wrapped his arm around my shoulders as I sobbed. All these years I'd thought my grandfather simply loved me. I hadn't known he'd been planning my escape. He loved you enough to make it hard, Thomas said gently. That's the deepest kind of love. But Richard Hayes had spent 5 years believing he'd successfully buried his father's will. And when he found out the truth, he'd make sure I understood exactly what challenging him would cost. The day after meeting with Thomas Blackwell, Jennifer Martinez called an emergency strategy session. She'd assembled her paralegal, a law clerk, and had prepared what she called the war room. Daniel and I arrived to find her conference table covered in organized folders, each labeled with a different aspect of our case. We're building something comprehensive here, Jennifer said, gesturing to the files. Margaret's recording and incident report from the preschool, that's pattern evidence. The medical report and photos from the pediatrician you took your son to after Christmas, that's documentation of the assault. The CPS correspondence that proves the false report. Emily's financial records showing $180,000 in debt, that's motive. and Thomas Blackwell's affidavits regarding the suppressed will that proves your father's fraud. She spread out a timeline on the table, color-coded and detailed. Here's the strategy. We're filing a multi-pronged approach. First, a restraining order against Emily for assault and harassment. Second, we're pursuing criminal charges for filing a false CPS report that's a misdemeanor, but it's still on record. Third, a civil suit against your father for fraudulent concealment of the will. And fourth, we're preparing for what will likely be Emily's criminal trial. The DA is reviewing the assault charge now. I expect they'll prosecute. How long will all this take? I asked. 4 to 6 months, realistically. Maybe longer if your father fights the will claim, which he will. Jennifer leaned forward. But there's something else we need to do. If Emily hit your baby and hit a child at the preschool 8 years ago, there are probably others. We need to find them. Pattern evidence is powerful. She suggested I do something that terrified me: tell my story publicly. Not all of it, not the will or the private details, but enough to ask if anyone else had experienced similar behavior from Emily. Jennifer and I drafted a carefully worded statement over the next 2 days. It went through 7 revisions before we posted it. On Christmas Eve, my sister assaulted my infant son at a family dinner. I've since learned this wasn't the first time she's been violent with children. If you've had concerning experiences with Emily Hayes, particularly involving children, please contact my attorney, Jennifer Martinez, at the number below. Your information will be kept confidential unless you choose to come forward publicly. I hit post with shaking hands, expecting maybe silence or backlash. Instead, my phone started ringing within an hour. By the end of the week, 12 women had contacted Jennifer. 12 mothers and former colleagues with documented incidents. Emily grabbing children at playgrounds, Emily yelling at kids in stores, Emily making cruel comments to pregnant women, Emily being asked to leave children's birthday parties. Each story added another piece to the mosaic of who my sister really was. But as the case built momentum, something else was building too, tension in my marriage that I didn't know how to name. It started small. Daniel began showing up at my therapy sessions with Dr. Morris sitting in the waiting room and then asking if he could join just to understand what you're processing. Then he started reviewing my social media before I posted anything. Just to make sure it can't be used against you, he'd say. He attended every meeting with Jennifer, even when she gently suggested I might want attorney-client privilege for certain discussions. I told myself he was being protective, supportive. He was on my side in a way my family never had been. But slowly, uncomfortably, I realized I wasn't leading my own case anymore. Daniel was. The breaking point came when Jennifer mentioned during a routine call that Daniel had reached out to one of her colleagues. He was asking about more aggressive representation, wanted to know if I was being too cautious with strategy. My blood went cold. What? I'm not offended, Jennifer said quickly. Clients often get second opinions, but he didn't mention it to you. That night, I confronted Daniel. You contacted another lawyer without telling me to see if Jennifer wasn't aggressive enough. He looked caught off guard. I was just being thorough, making sure we're not missing anything. It's my case, Daniel. My family. My decisions to make. And I'm trying to help you make the right ones. His voice rose, frustration breaking through. Your family is dangerous. If I don't stay on top of every detail, they'll find a weakness and exploit it. I'm protecting you. By taking over my life, the words came out sharper than I intended. You're at my therapy sessions. You approve my social media. You're in every lawyer meeting. You're researching other lawyers behind my back. When did supporting me become controlling me? That's not fair. I'm not your father. No, but you're treating me like I can't make my own decisions. We went to bed angry that night, the first time in 6 years of marriage. The next day was worse, cold politeness, careful distance, both of us hurt and defensive. By the second day, I was crying in the bathroom while Daniel worked late at the base, clearly avoiding coming home. On the third day, Daniel came home early and found me in the kitchen. Can we talk? I nodded, bracing for another fight. Instead, he sat down and said, "I talked to my therapist on base. She pointed out something I didn't want to see. I've been treating you like a civilian who needs extraction instead of a partner with agency." I blinked, surprised. When I watch you suffer, when I see your family attacking you, I feel helpless. And I'm not good with helplessness. In the military, the way I deal with threats is to control every variable, manage every detail, eliminate risk before it becomes danger. But you're not a mission, Ash. You're my wife. And by trying to protect you from every possible threat, I'm taking away your power in a situation where you desperately need it back. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I need you beside me, not in front of me. I know. I'm sorry. He reached across the table and took my hand. Tell me what you need. What does supporting you actually look like? We talked for 2 hours. We agreed on boundaries. Daniel would attend meetings only when I invited him. I would make final decisions on legal strategy even if he disagreed. We'd check in weekly about whether he was supporting or managing, and he'd back off my therapy sessions unless I specifically asked him to join. This is your fight, he said. I'm your backup, not your commander. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. But it was real growth, painful and necessary. Our marriage became stronger because we chose to grow through this crisis instead of letting it fracture us. But while we were rebuilding trust, Emily was planning her most desperate move yet, one that would cross from vindictive into criminal. 3 weeks after Daniel and I set new boundaries in our marriage on a Tuesday morning in early February, Emily made her most desperate move yet. Daniel had left for the base an hour earlier. I was in the living room with my son building a tower of blocks that he kept gleefully knocking down, both of us laughing. It was one of those perfect moments of ordinary motherhood that I'd fought so hard to protect. Then the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a woman in business casual clothing, gray slacks, white blouse, a lanyard with what looked like an official badge. She carried a clipboard and wore an expression of professional concern. I didn't recognize her. "Mrs. Reed?" she called through the door. "I'm Karen Miller from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your case. We have some concerns that need immediate attention." My stomach clenched. Sandra Chen was my assigned caseworker, and she'd closed my case 2 weeks ago with a letter stating all allegations were unfounded. Why would a different CPS worker be here? "I have a caseworker already," I said through the door. "Sandra Chen. I know this is unexpected, but there's been a development. We need to conduct an immediate welfare check. It's urgent, Mrs. Reed. Please open the door." Something felt wrong. CPS workers usually called ahead, and this woman's tone was too aggressive, too insistent. But I also knew that refusing to cooperate with CPS looked suspicious, could be used against me. My hand trembled as I opened the door with the chain lock still engaged. The woman held up her badge. It looked official at a glance, laminated with a seal. "I need to see the child, right now." Her urgency felt manufactured, performative. But years of conditioning to comply with authority had me reaching for the chain lock. As I slid it open, she pushed past me with shocking force, nearly knocking me off balance. I turned and my blood turned to ice. It was Emily, a wig, shoulder-length brown hair instead of her blonde, glasses with thick frames. But unmistakably my sister, standing in my living room holding a clipboard with photocopied CPS letterhead that looked like it had come from a home printer. The badge dangling from her neck was a crude fake, probably made from a template she'd found online. Her face was manic, desperate, her eyes too bright. "Emily, get out!" She lunged for my son and his playpen before I could finish the sentence. "He's not safe with you!" she screamed. "I'm taking him somewhere safe. Dad has a lawyer ready. You're an unfit mother, everyone knows it." Pure adrenaline overrode every other thought. I threw myself between Emily and my baby, my body a barrier. My son was crying now, terrified by the shouting and chaos. Emily grabbed my arm, trying to push me aside. I grabbed her wrist. We struggled, a desperate, graceless fight in my living room. I lunged for my phone on the couch, but Emily slapped it from my hand, sending it skittering under the coffee table. "Give him to me." Emily's voice was breaking. "I deserve this. I deserve a baby. You don't even appreciate him. Get away from my son!" I shoved her hard, putting myself directly between her and the playpen. My son's screams filled the room. Then suddenly my front door crashed open. Maria Santiago. My next-door neighbor, a woman I'd exchanged maybe 20 words with in 2 years of living here, charged in with her teenage son, Miguel, right behind her. "I called 911, Maria shouted. "Get away from her!" Emily froze her hand, still reaching toward the playpen. Miguel had his phone up, filming everything. Emily's eyes went wide as she realized she was being recorded in disguise in my house, caught in the act. "Maria," I gasped. "I've been watching your house since that CPS lady came weeks ago," Maria said rapidly, positioning herself beside me, another barrier between Emily and my son. "You looked so scared that day. This morning I saw this woman sitting in a car outside your house for 20 minutes just watching. Then she put on that wig and walked up to your door. Something felt wrong." Miguel kept filming, his hands steady. "Got it all, Mom. Her breaking in, trying to grab the baby, everything." Emily looked at the phone, then at Maria, then at me. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "He needs me. She doesn't deserve—" Sirens wailed outside, growing louder. Emily bolted for the door, but 2 police officers were already coming up the walkway. She made it 3 steps onto my porch before they intercepted her. "Ma'am, stop right there," one officer commanded. Emily tried to run anyway. They caught her easily, and within seconds, she was in handcuffs, screaming, "You've always been jealous of me, Vanessa. You took everything from me. I just wanted a baby, just one thing that was mine." The raw agony in her voice was almost sympathetic. Almost. Except I was holding my terrified son, looking at the fake CPS badge she'd created, realizing how close I'd come to losing him. If Maria hadn't been watching, if Miguel hadn't filmed, if Emily had succeeded in getting him out the door. The police took statements from all of us. Miguel's video was damning Emily in disguise, forcing her way into my house, lunging for the baby, the struggle, everything. A detective arrived and reviewed the footage, then looked at me with something like respect. "Your neighbor might have saved your son's life, Mrs. Reed." Within an hour, my parents arrived. My father's face was already set in damage control mode. "Officers, this is clearly a misunderstanding. My daughter Emily has been under tremendous stress. She was worried about her nephew. She shouldn't have pretended to be from CPS. I understand that, but her intentions were good." The detective cut him off coldly. "Mr. Hayes, your daughter attempted to abduct a child using false government credentials. She violated a restraining order. Intention doesn't negate the crime. She's being charged with attempted kidnapping, criminal impersonation, and violation of a protective order." My mother stood silent, pale as death, looking between me and the police car where Emily sat handcuffed. I could see Patricia wanted to say something. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. But no words came. She couldn't choose between us, so she chose silence. That night, I learned Emily was being held on $100,000 bail. Jennifer called, advising my father not to post it. Let her sit for a few days. It might be the wake-up call she needs. But of course, within 24 hours, Richard had posted the full amount. Emily was released with a GPS ankle monitor and orders to stay 500 feet away from me and my home. Emily's arrest should have been rock bottom, but I was about to discover that some families would rather burn their reputation than admit their golden child was broken, and Richard Hayes had matches ready. 2 days after Emily's arrest on Sunday morning, Daniel and I sat in our car outside First Community Church, debating whether to go in. "Oh, we don't have to do this," Daniel said. "Your family will be there. Emily might be there. That's exactly why we should go." But my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. First Community had been the Hayes family church for 40 years. My father served on the finance committee. My mother led a women's Bible study. We owned the third-row pew center aisle the way some families own cemetery plots. We walked in late during the opening hymn, and immediately I saw her. Emily. sitting in our family pew with our mother beside her. My sister was impeccably dressed, a modest navy dress, pearl earrings, hair styled perfectly. No wig, no disguise. Just Emily looking like the picture of wounded grace. Her makeup was flawless but subtle, designed to look natural while hiding any evidence of the chaos of the past 48 hours. She had a tissue in her hand that she dabbed at her eyes periodically. My father was conspicuously absent. Strategic, I realized. Sending his troubled daughter with his loyal wife made them look vulnerable, sympathetic. Richard Hayes didn't do anything by accident. We slipped into a back pew. Throughout the service, I watched people glance at Emily with expressions of concern and compassion. She played her role perfectly, head bowed during prayers, singing hymns with visible emotion, the picture of a woman seeking spiritual solace. During the coffee hour after service, I watched from across the fellowship hall as Emily worked the room. She approached people with that practiced, vulnerable script I could almost hear. "I'm so sorry for any concern I've caused. I've been going through such a difficult time with my fertility struggles. I made a mistake, but I'm getting help. All I wanted was to make sure my nephew was safe." And it worked. People hugged her. Older women patted her hand. A group of mothers from the nursery formed a protective circle around her, offering prayers and support. To them, Emily was a sympathetic figure, a woman struggling with infertility who'd made a poor decision out of misguided concern. They didn't know about the fake badge, the disguise, the attempted kidnapping. They only knew the story Emily was telling them. "We should leave," I said to Daniel. Before we could move, a woman's voice stopped us. "Vanessa Hayes. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Pastor Elizabeth Morrison stood before us, 60-something steel-gray hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd led this church for 15 years, and I'd always found her intimidating in the way that deeply competent people often are. "In my office, if you don't mind." We followed her down a hallway to a small room lined with bookshelves. Pastor Morrison closed the door and gestured for us to sit. "I saw the police report," she said without preamble. "I have a friend in the department who's concerned about how your family is spinning this. And I received a recording from Margaret Torres. She's a member here and asked if I'd be willing to listen to it given the situation." My throat tightened. "You heard it. The preschool incident." "Yes." Her expression was grave. "Vanessa, I need you to know that I believe you. And I need you to know that this church has turned a blind eye to the Hayes family's dysfunction for too long because of their donations and their status in this community. That ends today." I couldn't speak. Someone believed me. Someone in a position of authority was choosing me over the Hayes family narrative. "I'd like to give you the opportunity to address the congregation during announcement time," Pastor Morrison said. "You don't have to, but I think people need to hear the truth from you, not filtered through your family's version of events." My immediate instinct was to refuse, to avoid conflict, to keep my head down. But then I thought about my son growing up watching me be silent while his aunt destroyed our lives. I thought about the 12 mothers who'd come forward with stories about Emily. I thought about Margaret, who'd kept silent for 8 years and regretted every day of it. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'll do it." 10 minutes later, I stood at the front of the church holding a microphone that felt impossibly heavy. 150 people stared at me. Emily sat frozen in the third row, her face already hardening as she realized what was about to happen. My voice shook when I started, but I forced the words out. "Many of you know my family. You've admired us, maybe envied us. The Hayes family looks perfect from the outside, but that perfection has a cost, and I've paid it my whole life." I saw people exchange uncomfortable glances. This wasn't what happened during announcement time. This wasn't Sunday morning appropriate. On Christmas Eve, my sister Emily slapped my 10-month-old son across the face because he was crying. 20 people witnessed it. Not one person intervened. Not one person defended a baby who'd been struck by an adult. The silence in the room was absolute. 2 weeks later, Emily filed a false report with Child Protective Services accusing me of being an unfit mother. She used specific language designed to make me look unstable, dangerous to my own child. She was projecting her own violence onto me. I saw my mother's face crumbling, but I kept going. 2 days ago, Emily disguised herself as a CPS worker, fake badge, fake credentials, fake authority. She forced her way into my home and tried to take my son. She was arrested for attempted kidnapping, criminal impersonation, and violating a restraining order. Someone in the back gasped. I saw shock rippling through the congregation. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because secrets protect abusers. For anyone here who's experienced family violence, who's been told to keep the peace or not make waves, who's been convinced that maintaining appearances matters more than safety, I see you. And I'm done being silent. My hands steadied as I found my rhythm. This isn't the first time Emily has hurt a child. 8 years ago, she was fired from Little Sprouts preschool for striking a 3-year-old boy. There's documentation, incident reports, audio recordings, witness statements. My father paid the preschool $50,000 to hide it, to destroy evidence, to ensure Emily faced no consequences. You're lying. Emily was on her feet, her face twisted with rage. The carefully constructed victim mask had shattered. You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted what I have. I'm the one who suffered. You don't know what it's like to want a baby and not be able to have one. To watch everyone else get pregnant while you fail over and over. Her voice cracked into a scream. I deserved a baby. I deserved to be happy. And you got it without even trying. You don't even appreciate him. The outburst proved my point better than any evidence I could have presented. Emily's uncontrolled rage, her entitlement, her complete inability to see anyone's pain but her own, it was all on display for 150 witnesses. Pastor Morrison stepped forward, her voice firm but kind. Emily, I think you need to leave. This is my church. This is God's church. And right now, you need to go. Emily grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. My mother stood looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Pain, shame, something close to pride maybe, before hurrying after Emily. The congregation sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, Maria Santiago stood up from where she'd been sitting in the back. I was there 2 days ago. I saw Emily try to take Vanessa's baby. Everything Vanessa said is true. One by one, others stood. A woman I didn't recognize. Emily screamed at me at Target when my toddler was crying. Another, she made cruel comments to me when I was pregnant. A former co-worker of Emily's, she was fired from my office for throwing things during a baby shower. The truth was spreading like light through darkness. The church confrontation stripped away Emily's victim mask, but it also set Richard Hayes into action. And a man who'd spent 40 years controlling his family's image wasn't about to let his daughter destroy it. 3 days after the church confrontation, a thick envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a letter on expensive letterhead from Crawford & Associates, my father's corporate law firm. The language was formal, cold, meticulously crafted. Settlement offer in the matter of Hayes family dispute, the header read. I sat at my kitchen table reading it 3 times, each time feeling more conflicted. $500,000, paid immediately in a lump sum into an account of my choosing. In exchange, I would drop all legal action against Emily, sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding family disputes, and agree to resume normal family relations. There was also a clause requiring me to make a joint public statement with Emily describing the Christmas incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by stress and miscommunication. The letter concluded, "This offer is made in the best interest of family unity and the well-being of all parties, particularly the minor child who would benefit from a united, peaceful family environment." $500,000. More than Daniel made in 2 years. Enough to secure my son's college education completely. Enough to expand the foundation work I wanted to do. Enough to never worry about money again. I called Jennifer immediately. "It's a lot of money," she said carefully. And I can't tell you what to decide. But I can tell you what this offer means. Your father knows the will case is solid. He knows Emily's criminal charges are serious. And he knows public opinion is turning against them after what happened at the church. This is desperation money, Vanessa. He's trying to buy silence before this gets any worse for them. But it's still life-changing money. It is. And only you can decide if it's worth what you'd have to give up to accept it. Jennifer paused. What would you have to do? You'd have to publicly say Emily didn't assault your son. You'd have to pretend the attempted kidnapping was reasonable concern. You'd have to sign away your right to ever tell the truth about your family. And you'd have to let Emily face no consequences for putting your child in danger. Is that worth $500,000? When she put it that way, my stomach turned. But the old conditioning was strong. Take the money, stop causing trouble, keep the peace. It was the same pattern that had controlled me for 35 years, just dressed up with more zeros. There's a condition, I told Jennifer after reading further. Emily wants to apologize in person before I sign. My father says it demonstrates her genuine remorse and growth. Jennifer snorted. Of course he does. Vanessa, this is theater. They want you in a room where they can manipulate you emotionally. I want to hear what she has to say. It surprised me to realize I meant it. Part of me needed to see if Emily was capable of real accountability, or if this was just another performance. Daniel was more skeptical. I want to be there. I want to see her try to manipulate you with her crocodile tears. 2 days later, we met at Jennifer's law office conference room. Emily arrived with Patricia and a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s kind face, carrying a leather portfolio that screamed therapist. Emily's therapist, I realized. 1 week of therapy sessions to demonstrate she was getting help. Emily looked smaller somehow, thinner. Her eyes were rimmed with red like she'd been crying, though her makeup was still perfect. She sat across from me, our mother beside her, the therapist at the end of the table like a referee. Vanessa. Emily began, her voice soft and trembling. I'm so sorry for how my actions made you feel. There it was, immediately deflection. Not, I'm sorry for what I did, but, I'm sorry for how you feel. I was in a really dark place with my fertility struggles, Emily continued. I don't know if you can understand what that's like, spending years trying to have a baby, failing over and over, watching everyone else get pregnant so easily. It's been devastating. I wasn't in my right mind. I should have handled things better. Every sentence was carefully constructed to shift focus from her actions to her suffering. Not, I was wrong to hit your baby, but I was suffering, so I handled things badly. I hope we can move past this for the sake of family, Emily said, her eyes filling with tears. I'm getting help. I'm in therapy now. She gestured to the woman beside her. Dr. Reeves has been helping me process my trauma around infertility. I'm working on better coping mechanisms. The therapist, Dr. Reeves, nodded supportively. Emily has been doing important work on understanding her trauma response. She's committed to growth and healing. 1 week. She'd been in therapy for 1 week, and now she had a professional validating her narrative. My mother spoke up, her voice pleading. We all make mistakes, Vanessa. Emily is getting help. She's trying to be better. Isn't that what matters, that she's willing to change? I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was in pain, that much was real. Years of failed IVF, mounting debt, watching me have the one thing she desperately wanted. I understood that pain now in a way I hadn't before, but understanding pain didn't excuse violence. Sympathy for her suffering didn't erase what she'd done to my son. No, I said quietly. Emily blinked. What? I don't accept your apology, and I won't sign the settlement. The room went silent. Emily's face shifted from vulnerable to confused to angry in the span of seconds. Are you serious? Her voice rose. $500,000 and you're saying no. Do you know what I could do with that money? What you could do with it? This isn't about money, Emily. You hit my child. You filed false reports to CPS. You disguised yourself and tried to kidnap him from my home. Those are crimes. And every single time someone lets you avoid consequences, every time dad pays someone off, every time mom makes excuses, every time you're allowed to cry your way out of accountability, you hurt someone else. I'm breaking that pattern." Patricia began crying. "Vanessa, please. Think about family. Think about your sister. She needs us." I turned to my mother, and something in me that had been breaking for months finally snapped clean through. I am thinking about family, Mom. My family. My son. The family I'm building with Daniel. That's who I protect now. Not the family that enabled my abuse. Not the family that values reputation over safety. My son deserves better than that. I stood up. Emily's therapist looked uncomfortable. Jennifer had her poker face on, but I saw approval in her eyes. Emily played her final card, her voice sharp with bitterness. "You're doing this because you're jealous. You've always wanted what I have. You can't stand that I'm the successful one, the pretty one, the one everyone loves." I stopped at the door and looked back at my sister. "Emily, I don't want what you have. I want you to get help, real help, not 1 week of therapy to manipulate a settlement meeting. I want you to stop hurting people. But that's not my responsibility anymore. That's yours." I walked out. Daniel followed. Jennifer stayed to handle the formalities of rejecting the settlement. In the car, Daniel took my hand. "You okay?" "I chose justice over peace. I'm not sure if that makes me strong or stupid." "It makes you a mother protecting her child." He squeezed my fingers. "And it makes you brave." Vanessa had chosen justice over peace. But justice meant a public trial, and Richard Hayes wasn't going to let his family's secrets spill into a courtroom without a fight. 2 weeks after I walked out of that settlement meeting, I walked into a courtroom. The County Superior Court building was imposing, all marble and high ceilings, the kind of architecture designed to remind you that justice is serious business. Daniel held my hand as we walked through security past a cluster of reporters who shouted questions I didn't answer into courtroom 4, where my sister would face criminal charges for what she'd done to my son. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Local media in the back rows, notebooks ready, community members who'd been following the case. People from church. Hayes family supporters sitting on one side, their expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. And people who'd come forward with their own stories about Emily sitting on the other side, a silent show of solidarity. Emily sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. Her attorney, Gerald Simmons, was everything my father's money could buy. Expensive suit, practiced. Smile, the kind of lawyer who made a living convincing juries that wealthy people's mistakes were understandable lapses rather than crimes. The prosecution table held District Attorney Rebecca Ortiz, a woman in her 50s, known for taking child abuse cases seriously. Jennifer had told me Ortiz had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and very good at her job. The charges were read: assault on a minor elevated to a felony due to the victim's age, attempted kidnapping a felony, criminal impersonation of a government official also a felony. Each charge carried significant prison time. Rebecca Ortiz stood for her opening statement, and the courtroom went silent. This is a case about a pattern of violence against children enabled by family wealth and status finally being held accountable. Her voice was clear, authoritative, the voice of someone who'd stood in front of juries hundreds of times. Emily Hayes has hurt children before. 8 years ago, she was fired from Little Sprouts preschool for striking a 3-year-old child. That incident was documented with audio recordings and witness statements. But that child never got justice because Emily Hayes' father paid $50,000 to make the evidence disappear. I watched the jury, 7 women, 5 men ranging from their 20s to their 60s. Several took notes. The defendant received fertility treatments over several years. Ortiz continued. Medical professionals documented concerning behavior, obsessive ideation about pregnancy, inappropriate anger toward pregnant women and mothers. A fertility clinic banned her after she verbally attacked a pregnant patient in their waiting room. The pattern was clear. Emily Hayes had developed dangerous, irrational hostility toward children and the women who have them. Ortiz walked closer to the jury box. On Christmas Eve, surrounded by 20 witnesses, Emily Hayes struck her 10-month-old nephew across the face with enough force to leave a visible mark. When that assault didn't result in consequences, when her family chose to protect her instead of the child, she escalated. She filed a false report with Child Protective Services accusing the baby's mother of abuse. When that didn't work, she took the most desperate, dangerous step. She disguised herself as a government official and attempted to physically remove that child from his home. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is a pattern of escalating violence against the most vulnerable victims, and it's time for accountability. She sat down. The jury looked at Emily with new eyes. Gerald Simmons stood for the defense, and his entire demeanor was different, softer, more sorrowful, designed to evoke sympathy. Emily Hayes is a woman in crisis, he began. For 5 years, she underwent fertility treatments, spending her savings, taking loans, desperately trying to have a child. 5 times she endured the physical pain of IVF. 5 times she experienced the devastating loss when those treatments failed. The psychological toll was immense. Medical professionals will testify that infertility trauma can cause depression, anxiety, even irrational behavior. He paused, looking at the jury with genuine seeming compassion. Did Emily make mistakes? Yes. Does she regret them deeply? But the prosecution wants you to see a monster. I'm asking you to see a human being in pain who made terrible decisions but needs help, not prison. This is a woman who needs therapy, not a felony conviction that will destroy her life forever. It was effective. I saw a few jurors nodding slightly, their expressions softening. Then it was my turn to testify. Walking to the witness stand felt surreal. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down facing the courtroom. Emily wouldn't look at me. She stared at the table, her attorney's hand on her shoulder, in a gesture that was probably supposed to look supportive but read as controlling. Rebecca Ortiz approached me with a kind smile. Mrs. Reed, can you tell us what happened on Christmas Eve? I took a breath and began. I recounted the dinner, the babies crying, the judgmental comments from my mother and aunt. I described Emily's escalating agitation, her sudden grab across the table, and then the hardest part, the moment her hand connected with my son's face. What did you hear? Ortiz asked. A slap, a sharp crack, and then my son screaming. Not crying, screaming. The sound a baby makes when they're hurt and frightened. What did you see? A red mark on his cheek, the outline of her hand. It faded within a few hours, but it was unmistakably there. Ortiz entered the photos I'd taken that night into evidence. The jury passed them around. I watched their faces as they looked at my son's tiny face with that angry red mark. What did the other 20 people in that room do? Ortiz asked. Nothing. They looked away. My father told me not to make a scene. My mother said I was being too sensitive. Not one person defended my child. When I finished the direct examination, Gerald Simmons stood for cross-examination. I braced myself. Mrs. Reed, isn't it true that you've always felt overshadowed by your sister? Yes. He looked surprised I'd admitted it. So there's been tension between you for years. There's been inequality for years. Emily was favored. I was overlooked. That doesn't make what she did to my son acceptable. Isn't it true your husband has a history of aggressive behavior, that he threatened to call the police on Emily? My husband defended our child when no one else would. He documented an assault and said he'd report it if Emily didn't leave. That's protective, not aggressive. Simmons changed tactics. Isn't it convenient that all of this comes up right when there's a dispute about your grandfather's will? A will that supposedly leaves you millions of dollars. My jaw tightened. The will has nothing to do with this case. Emily hurt my child. I would be here regardless of money. Would you stand by and watch someone assault your child and do nothing because there was money involved? Your Honor, Simmons started. I'll allow it, the judge said. The witness may answer. I'm here because my sister is dangerous, I said clearly. Because she hurt my baby and then tried to take him from me. Money doesn't change those facts. I didn't lose my composure. I didn't cry or get angry. I just told the truth, and I could see it landing with the jury. During a break, I held my son while Daniel got me water. The jury watched me with him, watched how he reached for me, how he smiled and babbled, how clearly loved and cared for he was. It was better than any testimony. The afternoon brought Margaret Torres to the stand. She authenticated the recording, walked through the incident report, and explained the settlement my father had paid. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. I've regretted signing that NDA for 8 years, she said. I let money silence me. That child deserved better. Every child Emily has been near since deserved better. Then Rebecca Ortiz played the audio recording. The courtroom went silent as a 3-year-old's crying filled the space. Emily's voice escalating from annoyed to furious. Then the slap, unmistakable, sharp, violent. The child's scream of pain. I said stop crying! Emily's voice on the recording, harsh and cruel. Another voice. Emily, what did you— oh my God. I watched the jury. 3 women had tears in their eyes. A man in the back row looked at Emily with undisguised disgust. Even the sympathetic ones looked troubled. Gerald Simmons tried to attack Margaret's credibility on cross-examination. You violated a legal NDA. You broke your word. Doesn't that make you untrustworthy? Margaret looked at him steadily. I'm untrustworthy for keeping the secret for 8 years. I'm trying to be trustworthy now by finally telling the truth. The defense tried to argue the recording was too old to be relevant, but the judge ruled that pattern evidence was admissible. The recording stayed in. By the end of day 1, Emily sat at the defense table with her hands shaking, her face pale. The prosecution had established everything they needed. Emily had hurt children before she'd been protected by family money, and Christmas Eve wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Day 1 had been devastating, but day 2 would bring witnesses no one expected, including community members who'd stayed silent for years, and one person who would break Richard Hayes' control forever. Day 2 began with Rebecca Ortiz calling Maria Santiago to the stand. My neighbor, the woman who'd saved my son by calling 911 during Emily's attempted kidnapping, walked to the witness box with her head high. But what she testified about wasn't just that day, it was 3 other incidents spanning the past 5 years. I've seen Emily Hayes at our neighborhood playground multiple times, Maria said. The first incident was about 4 years ago. A toddler wouldn't share a toy with Emily when she tried to play with him. Emily grabbed the child's arm hard enough to leave bruises. The mother was horrified, but Emily said the child needed to learn manners. The mother reported it to playground staff. What happened after that? Rebecca asked. A few days later, Richard Hayes showed up at the mother's house. My husband and I live across the street. We saw him. The woman wouldn't say what was discussed, but suddenly she was saying the bruises were from something else and Emily had been misunderstood. A month later, they moved out of the neighborhood. The jury took notes. Maria described 2 more incidents: Emily yelling at children who were too loud, Emily following a pregnant woman around the playground making pointed comments about people who don't appreciate what they have. I should have done more, Maria said, her voice breaking. I should have warned Vanessa years ago, but the Hayes family has so much power in this town. I was afraid. Next came a woman named Jennifer Park, who'd worked with Emily at a marketing firm 3 years ago. She described a baby shower for a pregnant coworker that had ended in chaos. Emily seemed fine at first, but as the pregnant woman opened gifts and everyone fussed over her, Emily got quieter and quieter. Her face was red. Then, when someone handed the mother-to-be a particularly nice gift, a handmade quilt, Emily stood up, grabbed it out of her hands and said, "You don't even want this baby. You complained about being pregnant for months." Then she stormed out. Was that the end of it? Rebecca asked. No. She came back an hour later and apologized, saying she'd been having a bad day. But everyone was uncomfortable around her after that. She left the company a few weeks later. Witness after witness took the stand. A pediatrician's nurse named Claire Watson described bringing concerns about bruising on a child Emily had been babysitting. The explanation didn't match the injury pattern. We called CPS as mandated reporters. But the investigation was closed within days. Later, I learned Hayes' family lawyers had intervened. Each testimony added another piece to the pattern. Emily at birthday parties, grocery stores, parks, anywhere children were present, becoming agitated, aggressive, inappropriate. And in every case, someone had seen something wrong but hadn't reported it, or had reported it only to be silenced by the Hayes family's influence and money. But what devastated me most were the written statements Rebecca submitted 8 more women who couldn't attend court but wanted their experiences documented. The prosecutor's paralegal read them aloud, her voice steady but her hands shaking. One statement was from a woman at Emily's gym who'd been 7 months pregnant. Emily made comments every time she saw me. Must be nice to get fat and have everyone praise you for it. Some women don't deserve to be mothers. I hope you appreciate what you have because some of us would kill for it. The gym management asked me to work out at different hours to avoid her. Another from a mother's group Emily had briefly joined. She lasted 3 meetings. She spent the entire time talking about her fertility struggles and making passive-aggressive comments about how lucky we all were. When one woman mentioned her baby keeping her up at night, Emily said, "You're complaining I'd give anything to be kept up by a baby. You're so ungrateful." We asked her not to come back. The most chilling statement came from a woman named Rachel Chen, who'd attended a fertility support group with Emily 4 years ago. The paralegal read it in a careful, measured tone that made the words even more disturbing. Emily fixated on another group member who got pregnant naturally after years of being told it was impossible. Emily started stalking her social media, commenting on every post. Then she showed up at the woman's house uninvited, saying she just wanted to see if it was really true. When the pregnant woman asked her to leave, Emily said, "Some people don't deserve miracles. God makes mistakes sometimes." The woman got a restraining order. Our group leader expelled Emily for creating an unsafe environment. The courtroom was silent. This wasn't about Christmas Eve anymore. This was about years of escalating behavior documented across different contexts and situations, always centered around children and pregnant women. Gerald Simmons tried to recover during his cross-examination of the later witnesses, suggesting they were coordinating stories or seeking attention. But the dates were documented, the incidents were consistent, and the witnesses' discomfort was genuine. These weren't people seeking spotlight. They were people carrying guilt about their silence. When Maria Santiago was recalled for a final question, she broke down completely. "I should have knocked on Vanessa's door years ago. I should have told her I was watching, that I believed her, that she wasn't alone. I was a coward. I'm trying to be brave now." The jury watched 12 women testify and heard statements from 8 more. 20 women total spanning a decade, all with the same story. Emily Hayes was dangerous around children. Everyone knew it, and everyone stayed silent because the Hayes family was too powerful to fight. By the end of day 2, Emily sat at the defense table with tears streaming down her face, her attorney's arguments in shambles. Gerald Simmons had tried to paint this as a one-time breakdown, but the evidence showed it was a pattern documented, consistent, undeniable. 12 women had spoken. But the testimony that would truly break the Hayes family's facade would come from someone inside the family itself, someone who'd been silent for 35 years. On the morning of day 3, Rebecca Ortiz stood and said 4 words that made the entire courtroom gasp. "The prosecution calls Patricia Hayes." My mother walked from the gallery to the witness stand. My father, sitting in the courtroom for the first time since the trial began, went white. Emily turned to stare at our mother with an expression of complete betrayal. The judge looked at my mother carefully. "Mrs. Hayes, you understand you have spousal privilege. You cannot be compelled to testify against your husband regarding private marital communications." My mother's voice was steady in a way I'd never heard before. "I understand, Your Honor." I'm choosing to waive that privilege." Gerald Simmons shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a surprise witness. We weren't notified." "The witness has the right to waive privilege," the judge said firmly. "I'm allowing the testimony. Proceed." My mother looked at me, then sitting in the front row with Daniel. She mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Then she turned to my father and her face changed, hardened into something I'd never seen. Resolve, defiance, freedom. Rebecca Ortiz approached the stand. "Mrs. Hayes, how long have you been married to Richard Hayes?" 37 years. "Can you describe your marriage?" My mother took a breath. For the first few years, it was good. But slowly, Richard began controlling everything. The finances, I had to ask permission to spend money on groceries. My friendships, he'd criticize my friends until I stopped seeing them. My opinions, he'd belittle them in front of others, call them cute or naive, until I stopped sharing them. By the time Emily was born, I'd learned to defer to Richard on everything, especially the children. "Can you describe Richard's relationship with your daughters?" "Emily could do no wrong. Vanessa could do nothing right." My mother's voice cracked. When Vanessa was 7 and Emily was 5, Emily pushed Vanessa down the stairs. Vanessa broke her arm. Richard told the hospital it was an accident and warned me never to say otherwise. When Vanessa was 12, Emily destroyed Vanessa's science fair project the night before competition, cut it up with scissors out of jealousy. Richard bought Emily a new dress that same week. I sat frozen hearing these stories for the first time. My broken arm that I'd been told was my own clumsiness. My destroyed project that I'd been told to get over. "I wanted to protect Vanessa," my mother continued, tears streaming now. "But Richard controlled everything. If I challenged him, he'd threaten divorce, threaten to take the girls. He'd tell me I was too emotional, too soft. Over time, I stopped fighting. I became complicit in my own cowardice." Rebecca Ortiz walked her through the preschool incident. My mother described how Richard hadn't just paid for silence. He'd threatened to destroy the preschool to ensure they lost their license, to ruin them completely. They were terrified, and I said nothing. She revealed the anonymous money she'd been sending the education fund I'd only recently discovered. It was the only way I could help without Richard knowing. I thought maybe if I gave Vanessa a nest egg she could escape. But I should have done more. I should have been brave. "Mrs. Hayes," Rebecca asked gently, "what made you come forward now?" My mother looked at Emily, who sat weeping at the defense table. "When Emily tried to take Vanessa's baby, I realized I'd created this. By protecting Emily from consequences, by enabling Richard's control, I taught Emily that violence has no price. I watched my daughter become her father, entitled, cruel, unable to accept no. And I watched Vanessa become me, silent, afraid, trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it." She turned to me. "But then Vanessa did something I never could. She stood up, she said no, she fought back. And I realized if I don't help her now, I'm still the coward I've always been. I'm 62 years old. I've wasted most of my life being afraid. I don't want to die a coward." I was sobbing. Daniel's arm was around me, holding me upright. Gerald Simmons tried to paint my mother as a bitter wife seeking revenge, but she deflected every attempt with calm sadness. "I don't hate Richard. I pity him. He valued reputation over love, control over connection. He's lost both his daughters now because he couldn't love either of them the way they deserved." The jury was crying. The judge dabbed her eyes. Even the court reporter looked shaken. When my mother stepped down, she walked past my father without looking at him. She stopped at my seat and pulled me into a hug. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." Thomas Blackwell met her at the courtroom door. He'd been helping her prepare for this moment, helping her file for divorce, securing her a safe place to stay away from my father. My father sat alone in the courtroom, watching his empire crumble powerless for the first time in his life. Patricia's testimony had exposed the rot at the heart of the Hayes family, but it would take 4 more weeks for the jury to decide if Emily would finally face justice or if privilege would protect her one last time. 4 weeks after my mother's testimony, I sat in that same courtroom waiting for the verdict. 4 weeks of waiting, wondering, oscillating between hope and dread. The jury had been deliberating longer than anyone expected. Jennifer told me that was either very good or very bad. It meant they were taking it seriously, but it also meant at least some jurors were struggling with the decision. The courtroom was even more packed than it had been during the trial. National media had picked up the story after my mother's testimony went viral, a woman testifying against her own husband and daughter, exposing decades of family dysfunction. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but I could see reporters filling every available seat, notebooks ready. My mother sat on my side of the courtroom, now in the row behind me. My father sat on the opposite side alone, his expensive lawyer beside him, but no one else. Emily sat at the defense table in the same navy suit she'd worn every day of the trial, her face pale and drawn. The jury filed in. I tried to read their faces, but couldn't. The foreman, a woman in her 50s who'd taken meticulous notes throughout the trial, handed a paper to the bailiff. The judge reviewed it, her expression neutral. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." In the matter of the state versus Emily Patricia Hayes on the count of assault on a minor, how do you find? "We find the defendant guilty." Emily made a sound like she'd been punched. "On the count of attempted kidnapping, how do you find? "We find the defendant guilty." "On the count of criminal impersonation of a government official, how do you find? "We find the defendant guilty." Emily collapsed into her chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Gerald Simmons put his hand on her back, whispering something I couldn't hear. My mother closed her eyes but didn't cry. My father's face remained stone, giving nothing away. The judge thanked the jury and set sentencing for 6 weeks later. Then she addressed Emily. "Given the severity of the convictions and the pattern of escalating behavior documented in this trial, I'm ordering the defendant to remain in custody pending sentencing. Bail is denied." Emily's head snapped up. "What? No, I can go home. I've been out on bail." "Not anymore." The judge's tone was final. "Bailiff, please escort the defendant." As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Emily turned to look at me. Her face was a mask of rage and devastation. She screamed across the courtroom, "I hope you're happy you destroyed me, all because you couldn't handle that. Dad always loved me more." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! Order in this court!" But Emily wasn't done. As the bailiff tried to guide her away, she kept screaming, "This is all your fault, Vanessa. You were always jealous. You took everything from me." Even now, even after everything, Emily couldn't see it. To her, this wasn't about violence or accountability. It was about sibling rivalry and jealousy. She still believed she was the victim, that my father's love made everything she'd done somehow justified. I didn't respond. I just held Daniel's hand and watched my sister be led away in handcuffs, still screaming, still blaming everyone but herself. In the days after the verdict, the consequences cascaded rapidly. Sandra Chen from CPS sent me a formal letter. "Investigation has determined all allegations were unfounded. Subject appears to provide appropriate care. Case closed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be reopened without substantial new evidence." Jennifer immediately used that document to add another charge to Emily's sentencing hearing, filing a false CPS report, a misdemeanor. But one more nail in the coffin of consequences, Emily had avoided her whole life. Then the district attorney's office announced they were opening an investigation into my father. Obstruction of justice related to the preschool cover-up, witness tampering for threatening the preschool staff, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding the will suppression. The DA held a press conference explaining that while these charges were harder to prove than Emily's assault, they had substantial evidence thanks to my mother's testimony and Thomas Blackwell's documentation. My father suddenly faced the possibility of criminal charges himself. Within a week, his carefully constructed life began to crumble. Hayes Holdings lost 3 major clients who cited reputation concerns in their termination letters. The church where my family had been prominent members for 40 years asked my father to step down from the finance committee. The country club sent a polite but firm letter suggesting he take a leave from social events until the current situation settles. Jennifer showed me the texts and emails from former friends and business associates. Not one reached out to offer support. They all just quietly distanced themselves, protecting their own reputations by cutting ties with the Hayes name. My father was being erased from the social circles where he'd once held power. Thomas Blackwell called me 10 days after the verdict. "Your father's attorney contacted me. He's ready to discuss transferring the will assets. He's not apologizing. I don't think Richard Hayes is capable of that, but he's capitulating. He knows he's lost." "Why now?" I asked. "Because continuing to fight will cost him legal fees he can't afford anymore. His business is hemorrhaging clients. He's facing a potential criminal investigation. And he's finally realized the reputation he sacrificed everything to maintain is gone anyway." So my father was giving up. Not because he understood what he'd done wrong, not because he regretted the decades of favoritism and enabling, but because he'd calculated that surrender was cheaper than continuing to fight. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt hollow. But the will wouldn't be the only family secret to surface. Because the DA's investigation was about to uncover financial crimes that would cost Richard everything he had left. A week after my father's capitulation, Thomas Blackwell called to schedule the will transfer. "Your father won't be present. He's sending his lawyers with signed documents transferring all claims. I think facing you would be too much for his ego." Daniel and I arrived at Thomas's office on a Thursday morning. My father's lawyers were already there, 2 men in expensive suits who avoided eye contact and handed over a folder thick with documents. No pleasantries, no explanations, just signatures and notary stamps and the mechanical process of transferring nearly $10 million in assets from one person to another. Within 2 hours, I owned the Hayes Mansion, the investment firm, the charitable foundation, $1.2 million in liquid assets sitting in accounts that now bore my name instead of my father's. It should have felt momentous. Instead, it felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. My father's lawyers left without a word. Thomas closed the conference room door and returned to his desk. "There's one more thing. Your grandfather left something he wanted you to read only after the estate was officially transferred." He pulled a leather portfolio from his desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope. The paper was aged, slightly yellowed, but carefully preserved. My grandfather's handwriting on the front, "For Vanessa, to be opened when she's ready." "He didn't want this to influence your decision to fight," Thomas said softly. "He wanted you to fight because you knew you deserved to, not because he told you to." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages of careful handwriting dated April 2020, 2 weeks before my grandfather died. I recognized his script immediately, the same elegant penmanship he'd used to write me birthday cards every year until his death. I read it aloud, my voice breaking almost immediately. "My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, it means you found your strength. I always knew it was there, buried under years of being told you weren't enough. But strength doesn't come from being loved. It comes from choosing to love yourself when others won't." Daniel's hand found mine. I kept reading. I watched Richard break Patricia's spirit year by year. I watched him mold Emily into a reflection of his own entitlement. But mostly I watched him ignore you, my brilliant, kind, overlooked granddaughter, because you weren't convenient to his image of the perfect family. I confronted him many times. He told me to mind my own business, so I did by making you my business. Tears blurred the words. I wiped my eyes and continued. "This will isn't about money, Vanessa. It's about giving you a choice I gave Patricia too late, the choice to walk away with enough resources to survive without them. Your grandmother stayed because she had no options. Your mother stayed for the same reason. I won't let you stay if staying means accepting abuse." My grandfather explained the conditions on the will, financial independence, legal action, to protect myself, building my own family outside the Hayes dysfunction. If you did those things, it meant you'd broken free of the family's control. And only then would you be ready to receive this inheritance without it becoming another chain. He wrote about knowing Richard would try to suppress the will, why he'd used a separate attorney, why he'd made me wait and fight. I knew it would take years for you to become strong enough. I knew that by making the inheritance conditional, I was giving you a reason to stand up that you might not have found for yourself. I'm sorry it had to be this hard, but easy rescue would have kept you dependent. I needed you to save yourself. The final page was the one that broke me completely. Vanessa, I need you to know something. Your father will never say you were always enough. You were never second best. You were overlooked because seeing your goodness made Richard confront his own failures and he couldn't bear it. Emily was easier to love because she reflected his ego back to him. But you, my dear, you were always the better person. I was sobbing now, barely able to read the words. I'm sorry I didn't protect you more when I was alive. I was old and tired, and I made the mistake of thinking Richard would eventually change. He won't. But you will change everything for the next generation. Protect your son the way I failed to protect you. Break the cycle. Use this money to build a life where kindness is valued more than perfection. The last paragraph made me cry so hard I could barely breathe. And know that someone saw you. Someone chose you. Someone loved you exactly as you are. I did. I always did. You were never invisible to me, Vanessa. You were the brightest light in a family that preferred darkness. Shine on, my dear girl. Shine on. I folded the letter against my chest and wept. Daniel was crying. Thomas Blackwell dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. For a child who'd spent 35 years being invisible, being seen by one person, really truly seen, was everything. My grandfather had given me more than money. He'd given me validation, proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't oversensitive, wasn't wrong to feel hurt by my family's treatment. Someone had witnessed my pain and believed it mattered. I'm naming the foundation after him, I said when I could finally speak. The William Hayes Foundation for Survivors of Family Abuse. That's what this money will do. Help other people escape families like mine. Thomas smiled. He would have loved that. Vanessa had her grandfather's blessing and her inheritance. But Richard Hayes still had one card to play, and when it was revealed, it would cost him everything he'd spent 40 years building. 2 weeks after reading my grandfather's letter, Jennifer forwarded me another envelope. This one had been opened and read already. Jennifer's job was to screen Emily's correspondence from jail before passing anything to me. She's written you 6 times, Jennifer said on the phone. The first 5 were not good. Manipulative, self-pitying, some were threatening. I documented all of them for the sentencing hearing. But this one is different. I think you should read it. The envelope was thick, 11 handwritten pages on lined paper from a legal pad. Emily's handwriting instantly recognizable, despite the shakiness that came from writing without a desk. I sat at my kitchen table with Daniel beside me and began to read. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I'll send this. But my therapist here, court-ordered but actually helpful, says I need to write out my truth even if no one ever reads it. So this is me trying. The first 3 pages described her infertility journey in excruciating detail. The hope of each IVF cycle, carefully managing expectations, while unable to stop herself from imagining baby names, nursery colors the life she'd have. The crushing disappointment of each negative test, the way it felt like dying over and over. The physical pain of hormone injections, the bloating, the mood swings, the way her body felt like it was betraying her. The financial stress of watching her savings disappear into treatments that didn't work. The shame when friends announced pregnancies easily, the way she had to force herself to smile and congratulate them while dying inside. I know this doesn't excuse anything, Emily wrote. But you asked me once why I hated you, and the truth is I didn't hate you. I hated that you got pregnant without even trying. I hated that you got the life I desperately wanted. I hated that you seemed to get happiness without suffering for it the way I suffered. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the real source of her violence. Not stress, not mental illness. Jealousy. Pure, consuming jealousy. The next section made me put the letter down for a moment to breathe. The preschool incident, I remember it differently than the recording sounds. In my memory, that kid was deliberately defiant, purposely pushing my buttons, trying to make me look bad. But I listened to the recording in court. That child was just being a child. And I hit him because I couldn't control my frustration. That's happened more times than I can count, me reinterpreting situations to make myself the victim and others the aggressors. She was admitting to a pattern of distorting reality to justify her behavior. That was huge. That was something I'd never expected to hear from Emily. Your baby crying at Christmas? It triggered something in me that wasn't rational. I saw you holding him, calming him, being a mother so naturally, like it was easy for you, like you didn't even appreciate how lucky you were. And I snapped. I wanted to hurt him to hurt you. I wanted you to feel as powerless as I felt. My hands shook holding the pages. She was admitting she'd deliberately wanted to hurt my son to hurt me. Not an accident. Not a loss of control. A deliberate act of cruelty born from jealousy. The CPS report the kidnapping attempt, those were escalations. Each time you didn't back down, I got more desperate. I told myself I was protecting a child, but really I was trying to take yours away because I couldn't have my own. That's sick. I'm sick. I'm finally admitting it. Daniel squeezed my hand. You okay? I don't know, I whispered. The final pages were different in tone, quieter, more reflective, almost peaceful in a strange way. I don't know if I'll ever be okay. The therapist says I have deep-seated issues with entitlement, jealousy, and control. She says prison might actually save my life by forcing me to face consequences I've avoided my whole life. I'm scared. But I also know I deserve this. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. My sister, my terrible, damaged, dangerous sister, was finally taking responsibility. You were right to press charges. You were right to refuse the settlement. You were right about all of it. I'm writing this because I need you to know this isn't your fault. You didn't provoke me. You didn't make me do anything. I did this. And I'm sorry, really, truly sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry I hurt your baby and tried to destroy your life. The apology felt genuine in a way nothing from Emily ever had before. You deserved a sister who celebrated your motherhood. Instead, you got me. I'm going to be in prison for a while, my lawyer says 3 to 5 years minimum. When I get out, I won't contact you. You don't need me in your life. But I want you to know that somewhere I'll be trying to become a person who isn't defined by jealousy and violence. I don't know if I'll succeed. But I'm going to try. The letter ended with a paragraph that made me cry. I hope your son grows up never knowing what I did to him. I hope he grows up in a family where love isn't conditional and violence isn't tolerated. Give him the childhood we never had. Emily. I read the letter 3 times. Each time I felt different things. Anger at everything she'd done. Grief for the sister I'd never really had, for the relationship that might have existed in a different family. And a strange, small compassion for the pain Emily had lived with, pain that didn't excuse her actions but explained them. What are you feeling? Daniel asked gently. Everything, I said. I'm angry at her. I grieve for her. I feel sorry for her. And I also know she needs to face consequences for what she did. All of those things are true at the same time. Emily's letter offered no excuses, just truth. And I realized that forgiving Emily and holding her accountable weren't opposites. They were both acts of love, even when love looked like letting go. 5 days after I read Emily's letter, Jennifer called with news that would complete my father's downfall. The DA and IRS are holding a joint press conference in an hour. You should watch it. I turned on the news and saw IRS Special Agent Victor Morales standing at a podium beside District Attorney Rebecca Ortiz. Behind them were displays showing financial documents, flowcharts, bank statements. "Today we're announcing criminal charges against Richard Hayes," Agent Morales began. "Tax fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Our investigation began in January when suspicious financial patterns in Hayes Holdings were reported to authorities. What we uncovered was a systematic pattern of criminal behavior spanning over 15 years. My stomach dropped as he continued. Mr. Hayes siphoned $2.3 million from Hayes Holdings, a company technically owned by a family trust established by his late father, William Hayes. This money was transferred to personal accounts offshore holdings and used to pay settlements that covered up criminal activity, including his daughter's assault on a minor. The tax fraud stems from unreported income and false business deductions. The wire fraud involves systematically moving money between accounts to conceal the embezzlement. The obstruction charges relate to Mr. Hayes's active cover-up of violent crimes committed by family members. Rebecca Ortiz stepped forward. This investigation started as a civil tax matter, but as we examined the records, we found something worse, Mr. Hayes used corporate funds as a personal slush fund to maintain his family's reputation while enabling dangerous behavior. He paid $50,000 to suppress evidence of child abuse. He threatened witnesses. He used embezzled money to silence victims. The press conference continued for 30 minutes. Every financial crime my father had committed laid out in excruciating detail for the world to see. Within 48 hours, his life imploded. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Hayes Holdings was placed under temporary receivership, while forensic accountants continued their work. Business partners who'd stood by him through Emily's trial suddenly discovered their moral compasses. 3 filed lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, claiming they'd had no idea company funds were being misused. The country club revoked his membership. The luxury cars he drove were repossessed. They'd been leased through the company, and when payments stopped, the leasing company moved fast. His lawyer sent a terse estimate defending against these charges would cost at least $500,000, possibly more. My father had no liquid assets to pay it. Richard Hayes, who'd spent 40 years building an empire of wealth and reputation, was essentially broke and facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. My mother thankfully was protected. She'd filed for divorce and legal separation of assets the day after testifying at Emily's trial. Thomas Blackwell had worked quickly to ensure Richard's financial crimes couldn't touch her. She lived in a modest apartment now funded partly by the education money she'd saved and partly by a survivor support network. She'd lost the mansion and the country club, but she'd gained something more valuable: freedom. A week after the charges were announced, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Vanessa," my father's voice. Hollow, defeated. "I need your help." I pressed record on my phone. Jennifer had taught me to document everything. "You're violating the no-contact order from Emily's case," I said. "I know. I'm sorry. But I'm desperate." He paused. "I know I wasn't a good father. I know I failed you. But I'm still your father. The DA is offering a plea deal if I cooperate fully and make restitution. But I need access to money to pay what I owe. You control Hayes Holdings now through the will. I'm asking, begging, will you help me?" I'd rehearsed this conversation with Dr. Morris for weeks, knowing it might come. Still hearing my father beg was surreal. "No, Dad." "Vanessa, please. You taught me my whole life that family protects family. You said it constantly. But you never protected me. You protected your image. You protected Emily's reputation even when she was hurting children. You paid to cover up crimes. You threatened people who tried to hold her accountable. And now you want me to rescue you from the consequences of your own choices. I made mistakes. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. And now, you want me to enable you the way Mom enabled you for 30 years, the way you enabled Emily her whole life. I won't do it." His voice cracked. "You'd let your own father go to prison. You're sending yourself to prison, Dad. These are your crimes, your choices, your consequences. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. Not because I hate you, I don't. But because enabling you would make me just like Mom was for 3 decades. You need to face what you've done. Maybe that's the only way you'll ever understand what you cost us. Vanessa. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my heart was calm. Jennifer called 10 minutes later. He called you, didn't he? I got an alert from the monitoring system. I recorded it. Good. That helps document his harassment. He's desperate, Ash. Cornered. Be careful. But I wasn't afraid anymore. My father had no power left. No money to pay lawyers. No reputation to weaponize. No family to manipulate. He sat in a cheap motel room somewhere. Jennifer had told me he couldn't afford anything better, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing. No empire, no control. No one left to blame but himself. Richard's empire had crumbled. Emily was facing years in prison, and I finally had everything my grandfather intended. But winning the war didn't mean the healing was finished. That would take something harder than fighting. When the judge's gavel fell in the previous hearing and the courtroom emptied around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months' stillness. Not peace, not triumph, just a steady, grounded stillness, like the floor beneath me had finally stopped shifting. But that stillness didn't last long. Within 48 hours, responsibility arrived in the form of folders, lawyers, financial records, and documents confirming what I already knew but hadn't fully absorbed. Hayes Holdings and the Hayes Foundation were now mine. My father's legacy, his empire of secrecy and polished appearances, sat in my hands like a puzzle. I had to decide whether to rebuild or burn. I chose to rebuild. Rebuilding was the only way to break the cycle. The formal takeover happened on May 1st. I walked into the office, a modest space with outdated furniture, a flickering fluorescent bulb, and only 7 employees, feeling like I was stepping into a haunted house of my family's making. Thomas Blackwell met me at the door with a folder and a nod that told me he both trusted me and understood the scale of the mess ahead. Daniel stayed close, not hovering but grounding me with his presence. My father's financial misconduct had touched every corner of the business: unclear transfers, fabricated expenses, missing documentation. The company wasn't large, about $4 million in managed assets, but the damage was deeper than numbers. My first act as owner was hiring a new financial manager. Not someone flashy or connected to the old guard, but a woman who had left her previous firm after reporting discrimination and being subsequently pushed out. Her name was Dana, and she stepped into the office with the steady confidence of someone who'd rebuilt herself once already. I told her, "Your job is transparency. If something is ugly, tell me. If something is broken, show me. I don't want anything hidden." She nodded and got to work immediately. Next, I met with the employees one by one. Some looked embarrassed, others looked scared. I explained what happened, what my father had done, what I intended to change, and assured them they could either stay with full support or leave with severance and no hard feelings. 4 chose to stay. 3 left, thanking me quietly, as if relieved to walk away from the Hayes name. I respected their choices. After that, I redefined the company's purpose entirely. I stood in front of the remaining staff and said, "This place was built on image and secrecy. We're rebuilding it on transparency and values. If that doesn't work for you, I understand. But I won't continue my father's legacy." No one moved, no one objected. And for the first time, I saw something other than fear in people's eyes. I saw curiosity. Hope, even. I hired 2 more people, a man who had spent years advocating for family-friendly business policies, and a woman whose brilliance had been ignored in her previous job because she'd dared to speak up. The team was small, but they understood the mission. And maybe for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was trying to fit myself into a story someone else had already written. I was writing this one myself. While the company was transforming, I had to face the physical remains of my childhood. The Hayes Mansion, my father's pride, my grandmother's museum, my mother's gilded cage was legally mine, but every room felt like a bruise I didn't want to touch. Still, the law required proper notice, so I sent my father a formal eviction letter through Jennifer. He had 30 days to collect his things. I made everything clear, professional, humane. He didn't respond. On day 28, I hired a moving company. They packed his suits, photographs, awards, cufflinks. Every reminder of the man who hurt me through control and silence. I placed everything in a climate-controlled storage unit, paid for 6 months, and left him a key. I threw nothing away. I damaged nothing. But on day 31, I changed the locks. Walking through the empty mansion was like mourning a ghost I never loved. Every corner whispered memories I didn't want to keep. I didn't want to raise my child in those echoes. I didn't want to sleep in rooms where I'd cried quietly so no one would accuse me of making drama. I didn't want to breathe the air that had been shaped by fear and forced perfection. I decided the mansion would not remain a monument to the Hayes family. It would become something new, something useful. Over the next 3 months, I converted it into the headquarters of the William Hayes Foundation for Survivors of Family Abuse. My grandfather's name, not my father's. He was the one person in that family who saw me, who loved me without conditions. The dining room where Emily slapped my baby became a counseling center. The bedrooms turned into offices for social workers. The grand foyer with its staircase I used to descend in perfect silence became a waiting room filled with soft chairs and children's books. From the ashes of my childhood, I was building a place where others could find safety when their families tried to destroy them. I kept only 3 things from the house: my grandfather's desk, a photograph of my grandmother, and my childhood diary. Everything else was donated or repurposed. Mid-May, we launched the foundation. The mission was clear: provide legal support, therapy, emergency funding, and community for people trying to break away from abusive family systems. Margaret Torres, the woman whose recording had helped save me, became our program director. Giving her that role felt like closing a wound for both of us. Sandra Chen, the CPS worker who had investigated me during the false report, joined as a consultant. She specialized in helping teams distinguish real danger from fabricated accusations. Our very first client was a young woman whose parents were threatening to sue for grandparent rights, to force their way back into her life after she'd escaped their control. We paid for her lawyer. By the end of the month, we had helped 12 families. The local press interviewed me, and I said, "Healing isn't just personal, it's structural. Most people don't have the resources I had. This foundation exists so they don't have to choose between freedom and survival. I'd built something beautiful from something broken." But there was still one relationship unresolved, one person who had hurt me through silence and was now trying to find her voice. I thought transforming the mansion into the foundation headquarters would close the last major chapter of my past, or at least quiet some of the echoes that still lived inside me. For a while it did. The work was meaningful, the team was growing, and every family we helped felt like another stone lifted from my chest. But healing isn't linear, and it certainly isn't tidy. I realized that the moment I opened the letter from my mother in early June. A letter that looked nothing like the performative birthday cards or clipped holiday greetings she used to send. The handwriting was unsteady, the paper thick as if meant to carry something weighty. I hesitated before unfolding it, already bracing for disappointment. Instead, I found words that felt unfamiliar in their honesty. She wrote that she didn't expect anything from me, that she had failed me in every way a mother could, that she had allowed fear to become her compass and used it to justify silence. She said she was in therapy 3 times a week and attending a support group for women who had endured emotional abuse for decades. She admitted she had used her own pain as an excuse not to confront the harm happening inside her home. She told me she wasn't asking for forgiveness because she hadn't earned it. She ended with a simple line: "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. And if you never want to see me again, I understand." I didn't know what to do with the letter. A part of me felt the familiar anger rising, the instinct to dismiss anything that came from her. But another part, the part that had once prayed at night for her to see me, to protect me, felt something else entirely. Grief, maybe. Longing, certainly. I took the letter to my session with Dr. Chen, who had been guiding me through therapy since January. I read it aloud, my voice steady at first, then shaking near the end. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, then asked me what I wanted. Not what was expected of me. Not what forgiveness should look like. Not what a dutiful daughter might choose. Just what I wanted. The question stunned me. I had spent so long reacting to my family, surviving them, defending myself against them, that I hadn't considered I could choose something other than distance or destruction. I told her the truth that part of me still wanted my mother, or at least the possibility of a version of her I had never known. And another part of me was terrified. Terrified she would slip back into old patterns, terrified she would minimize what happened, terrified she would put her comfort above my safety again. Dr. Chen nodded and said, "What if you don't need to decide forever right now? What if you simply set boundaries and see if she can honor them?" Boundaries. The word felt strangely empowering. So I agreed to a single meeting with my mother, 1 hour public place, and I could leave whenever I wanted, no expectations before or after. We met at a quiet cafe in late June. I arrived first and sat with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone lukewarm by the time she walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the years of silent endurance had finally settled onto her shoulders. She didn't hug me or take my hands. She simply asked if she could sit. I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, she said she had failed me and that she knew it. She didn't offer excuses, didn't soften the truth with stories of her own suffering. She said she had chosen comfort over courage, and that she had allowed her fear of my father to matter more than my safety. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger but the ache of hearing words I had needed decades ago. I asked her questions I had kept buried for years. "Did you love me?" The words sounded childish, but they were all I could manage. She cried openly. She said she had loved me desperately, but that she didn't know how to love me and oppose my father at the same time. She said she believed keeping the family together meant protecting me, even though it did the opposite. Hearing her acknowledge that out loud was like opening a window in a room that had been sealed for years. The air felt different. Not clean, not yet, but moving. We talked about Emily next. My mother confessed she had known Emily had serious issues. She saw the cruelty, the jealousy, the twisted need for dominance long before I did. She said every attempt to intervene was dismissed by my father, who feared discipline would damage Emily's fragile self-esteem. Eventually, my mother stopped trying, convincing herself Emily would grow out of it. Instead, she grew into it. My mother also told me she had been visiting Emily in jail, something she had asked for permission to do because she didn't want to overstep. She said Emily was in intensive therapy and showing signs of change, but insisted that even if Emily became a better person someday, that wouldn't erase what she had done to me or my child. She made it clear she wasn't asking me to forgive Emily or rebuild anything. She was simply acknowledging her own desire to support her other daughter, while accepting my boundaries. Throughout the conversation, I kept waiting for the familiar shift for her to become defensive or to minimize what happened. But she didn't. She stayed present in the discomfort. She let the silence sit when it needed to. She owned the harm not as an abstract mistake, but as a concrete failure that shaped my life. By the time we stood to leave, my body felt like it had survived a storm, shaken, drenched, exhausted, but somehow more alive. Over the next months, we met again, not frequently, but intentionally. Once a month, same cafe, 1 hour. Those meetings were not warm or easy. Some ended with me frustrated, others with her holding back tears. There were moments when she slipped into old habits, a self-blaming comment meant to make me comfort her or a softening of my father's behavior that I had to interrupt immediately. But each time she listened when I corrected her, and she didn't repeat the pattern the next time. Progress was slow, imperfect, but real. In August, after months of consistent boundaries and respectful behavior, I let her meet my son. I watched her closely as she entered the room. She didn't rush toward him or make dramatic declarations. She asked permission before holding him, followed my cues, and didn't make the visit about her. When she left, she didn't guilt-trip me or ask when she could see him again. She simply said thank you, and that she knew she had to earn trust in small increments. Her change wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. I told Dr. Chen I didn't know if we would ever have a normal mother-daughter relationship. Too much had happened, too much had been lost. But maybe we could have something real, even if small. Dr. Chen said that wasn't settling. It was accepting what was possible without demanding what wasn't. By the end of August, I added my mother to the foundation board in a non-leadership role. She reviewed cases, offering insight as someone who had stayed too long in a harmful marriage and now understood the cost of silence. Her voice, shaped by regret and hard-won awareness, helped other women see the patterns they were afraid to name. For the first time in my life, I found a fragile peace with her. Something tender, but cautious, like holding a delicate object you're still learning to trust. But even as that relationship softened, one ghost remained. The sister who had tormented me for years was sitting in a cell sending letters I hadn't yet found the courage to read. 5 days after I read Emily's letter, Jennifer called with news that would complete my father's downfall. The DA and IRS are holding a joint press conference in an hour. You should watch it. I turned on the news and saw IRS Special Agent Victor Morales standing at a podium beside District Attorney Rebecca Ortiz. Behind them were displays showing financial documents, flow charts, bank statements. Today we're announcing criminal charges against Richard Hayes, Agent Morales began. Tax fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Our investigation began in January, when suspicious financial patterns in Hayes Holdings were reported to authorities. What we uncovered was a systematic pattern of criminal behavior spanning over 15 years. My stomach dropped as he continued. Mr. Hayes siphoned $2.3 million from Hayes Holdings, a company technically owned by a family trust established by his late father, William Hayes. This money was transferred to personal accounts offshore holdings and used to pay settlements that covered up criminal activity, including his daughter's assault on a minor. The tax fraud stems from unreported income and false business deductions. The wire fraud involves systematically moving money between accounts to conceal the embezzlement. The obstruction charges relate to Mr. Seimsa Magyarsit, Hayes's active cover-up of violent crimes committed by family members. Rebecca Ortiz stepped forward. This investigation started as a civil tax matter, but as we examined the records, we found something worse. Mr. Hayes used corporate funds as a personal slush fund to maintain his family's reputation while enabling dangerous behavior. He paid $50,000 to suppress evidence of child abuse. He threatened witnesses. He used embezzled money to silence victims. The press conference continued for 30 minutes. Every financial crime my father had committed laid out in excruciating detail for the world to see. Within 48 hours, his life imploded. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Hayes Holdings was placed under temporary receivership while forensic accountants continued their work. Business partners who'd stood by him through Emily's trial suddenly discovered their moral compasses. 3 filed lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, claiming they'd had no idea company funds were being misused. The country club revoked his membership. The luxury cars he drove were repossessed. They'd been leased through the company, and when payments stopped, the leasing company moved fast. His lawyer sent a terse estimate defending against these charges would cost at least $500,000, possibly more. My father had no liquid assets to pay it. Richard Hayes, who'd spent 40 years building an empire of wealth and reputation, was essentially broke and facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. My mother thankfully was protected. She'd filed for divorce and legal separation of assets the day after testifying at Emily's trial. Thomas Blackwell had worked quickly to ensure Richard's financial crimes couldn't touch her. She lived in a modest apartment now funded partly by the education money she'd saved and partly by a survivor support network. She'd lost the mansion and the country club, But she'd gained something more valuable: freedom. A week after the charges were announced, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Vanessa? My father's voice. Hollow. Defeated. I need your help. I pressed record on my phone. Jennifer had taught me to document everything. You're violating the no-contact order from Emily's case, I said. I know. I'm sorry. But I'm desperate. He paused. I know I wasn't a good father. I know I failed you. But I'm still your father. The DA is offering a plea deal if I cooperate fully and make restitution. But I need access to money to pay what I owe. You control Hayes Holdings now through the will. I'm asking, begging, will you help me? I'd rehearsed this conversation with Dr. Morris for weeks, knowing it might come. Still, hearing my father beg was surreal. No, Dad. Vanessa, please. You taught me my whole life that family protects family. You said it constantly. But you never protected me. You protected your image. You protected Emily's reputation even when she was hurting children. You paid to cover up crimes. You threatened people who tried to hold her accountable. And now you want me to rescue you from the consequences of your own choices. I made mistakes. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. And now you want me to enable you the way Mom enabled you for 30 years, the way you enabled Emily her whole life. I won't do it. His voice cracked. You'd let your own father go to prison. You're sending yourself to prison, Dad. These are your crimes, your choices, your consequences. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. Not because I hate you, I don't. But because enabling you would make me just like Mom was for 3 decades. You need to face what you've done. Maybe that's the only way you'll ever understand what you cost us. Vanessa. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my heart was calm. Jennifer called 10 minutes later. He called you, didn't he? I got an alert from the monitoring system. I recorded it. Good. That helps document his harassment. He's desperate, Ash. Cornered. Be careful. But I wasn't afraid anymore. My father had no power left. No money to pay lawyers. No reputation to weaponize. No family to manipulate. He sat in a cheap motel room somewhere. Jennifer had told me he couldn't afford anything better. And for the first time in his life, he had nothing. No empire. No control. No one left to blame but himself. Richard's empire had crumbled. Emily was facing years in prison, and I finally had everything my grandfather intended. But winning the war didn't mean the healing was finished. That would take something harder than fighting. Walking out of that meeting in October with my father's unexpected words still pressing at the edges of my mind, I felt as though something had finally settled into place inside me. Not peace exactly, but permanence. The year had reshaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated, and as November arrived, I felt another shift approaching. I could sense it most strongly when holiday decorations began appearing in store windows, small reminders of a season I had spent most of my adulthood avoiding. I had told myself for years that holidays didn't matter, that they were artificial, that the weight of expectation ruined whatever joy they were supposed to hold. The truth was harder to admit. My childhood holidays were never warm, only performative, and adulthood hadn't improved them. Now, with a child of my own, I couldn't avoid the question much longer. It was Patricia who gently brought the topic into the light. She visited one afternoon to drop off paperwork for the foundation board, and as she slipped into her coat to leave, she paused and asked if I had plans for Thanksgiving. Her voice carried none of its earlier hesitation, just a quiet invitation. She suggested something small, just her, my little family, and possibly Daniel's parents. No pressure, no obligations. A part of me bristled instinctively, the old reflex of self-protection rising as if I were about to be cornered. I took a breath and told her I'd think about it. That night, I sat with Daniel at the kitchen table while our son played with measuring spoons on the floor. The topic felt fragile, like lifting the lid on something densely packed. Daniel didn't push. He simply asked what I wanted holidays to mean for our son. I didn't have an answer yet, so I brought the question to my session with Dr. Chen. She asked it again with a different emphasis. What do you want Thanksgiving to represent for him, separate from what it represented for you? It was the first time I realized I had a choice. I didn't have to replicate the past or erase it. I could create something new. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't want forced smiles or long tables set with fancy dishes that no one was allowed to touch. I didn't want performances of unity or traditions held together by fear of disruption. I also didn't want avoidance because pretending holidays didn't exist would only teach my son that gathering was something dangerous or hollow. I wanted ease. I wanted authenticity. I wanted gratitude, not spectacle. When I finally called Patricia, I told her we'd do Thanksgiving together, but under specific boundaries, it would be at my house with food. I chose no social media posts and no discussion of the past unless I initiated it. Patricia agreed immediately without negotiating or suggesting alternatives. Thanksgiving arrived quietly. Instead of the elaborate haze menu of roast turkey, lacquered vegetables, and desserts arranged like museum pieces, I cooked tacos because my son loved them and because the simplicity felt freeing. The meal wasn't coordinated or perfectly plated, but it was warm. Conversation moved gently without the sharp edges I used to brace for. When we shared what we were grateful for, Patricia's voice trembled as she said she was grateful I had given her another chance. I didn't respond out loud, but something inside me softened. Watching my son babble happily in a home free of tension, surrounded by people who respected the rules I had set, I understood we had just created our first real holiday. And that memory would belong to him, not to the ghosts of my childhood. The holidays didn't stop reaching into the past, though. In early December, another letter arrived from Emily. I recognized her handwriting immediately, but this letter felt different even before I opened it. It was short and surprisingly steady. She wrote that she had been reading about the foundation. She said she was proud of me, though she acknowledged how strange that might sound after everything that had happened. She didn't center her feelings or ask anything of me. Instead, she described the work she was doing in therapy, the programs she'd completed, and the ways she was beginning to understand the patterns that shaped her. She admitted she didn't expect a reply. She said she wouldn't contact me when she was released. She simply wanted me to know she was trying to become a person who contributed something positive even if I never saw it. I read the letter twice before sharing it with Daniel. I asked him whether he thought people could really change. His answer was honest and steady. Some can, some can't. But he reminded me that the question I was really asking was whether I needed to witness Emily's transformation in order to continue healing. And the truth was that I didn't. My healing wasn't contingent on her progress. It belonged to me alone. That clarity guided me as I wrote my first and only letter back to her. I told her I appreciated her work, that I hoped she continued, but that I was no longer tethered to whether she became better. My well-being no longer depended on her choices. I wished her peace, but from a distance. Mailing that letter felt like setting down a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Just as I settled into that unexpected sense of closure, another echo of my past surfaced. In mid-December, I received a call from my father's public defender. He explained that Richard was taking a plea deal and would soon be reporting to federal prison for tax fraud and embezzlement. His financial situation had deteriorated so badly that he could no longer afford his old attorneys. Then the lawyer added that my father wanted to see me before he reported. The request startled me. My first instinct was to refuse. I owed him nothing. But I didn't want to react from old wounds, so I turned to the people who had earned a place in my circle. Everyone said the same thing. The choice was mine, and either decision was valid. After thinking it through, I decided to meet him, but only under strict conditions at Jennifer's office with Daniel present, and only for an hour. When my father walked into the room, he looked older than I had ever seen him. He didn't launch into excuses or theatrics. Instead, he spoke in a tired voice about how he had destroyed the family by chasing an image instead of building a home. He didn't apologize directly, but his words carried something quieter, like resignation or understanding. When he finished, I told him the truth. His acknowledgement didn't obligate me to reconcile, forgive, or repair anything. I wasn't responsible for his redemption the same way I wasn't responsible for the illusion he had forced us all to live inside. As I stood to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. He called me a better parent than he had ever been and asked me not to let my son forget that. I didn't respond. I simply walked out, Daniel's hand in mine, feeling strangely steady. For the first time, I had faced all the pieces of my past without being claimed by them. By then, I knew one truth with absolute certainty: the family I was choosing mattered more than the one I came from. The year wasn't over yet, and Christmas was approaching, but this time I felt something unfamiliar. I wasn't bracing for survival. I was preparing to thrive. Walking out of that December meeting with my father, I thought the emotional weight of the season might linger. But instead, I woke on December 24th with a calm I didn't expect. It startled me at first, the absence of dread, as if my body had finally stopped waiting for the next crisis. This Christmas felt nothing like the one a year ago. That night had been the breaking point. This one felt like a beginning. Daniel and I were hosting in the home we bought earlier in the year, a place that felt entirely ours. It wasn't grand or imposing, just warm and lived in, with soft lights, mismatched ornaments, and my son toddling around in holiday pajamas he refused to take off. The scent of pine and cinnamon floated through the rooms because I wanted it, not because I was trying to impress anyone. People would arrive soon, people I had chosen with intention, and the thought didn't tighten my chest the way gatherings used to. Daniel's parents were the first to knock, bringing homemade bread and the easy affection they'd always extended to me. Patricia arrived a little later, asking quietly if it was okay to come inside, a gesture that showed how much she'd changed. Maria came with her children and a tray of empanadas. Margaret walked in, laughing at something her husband had said outside. Jennifer arrived last, balancing a stack of desserts and announcing she refused to apologize for making too much. The house filled quickly with voices and warmth, a type of celebration I had rarely experienced before. No forced politeness, no careful choreography, just people showing up as they were. We ate at the farmhouse table Daniel built with a friend, the one that already had scratches from toys, and the faint stain from a spilled smoothie my son had proudly made on his own. I loved that table because no part of it demanded perfection. At one point during the meal, Daniel looked across the table at me and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. We didn't need words to acknowledge what this night meant. A year ago, we had been fighting to protect our son from the people who should have loved him most. Now we were surrounded by those who had chosen to stand with us. After dessert, when the house settled into a comfortable hum, I stepped onto the front porch for a breath of cold air. Patricia joined me, but waited for me to nod before standing beside me. Snow began to fall in quiet flakes, the kind that land softly and seem to erase sharp edges. She whispered her gratitude for being included, adding that she knew her presence was a privilege she had to earn, not something she was entitled to. I told her the truth. Her place in my life existed because she had done the internal work I once believed she would never attempt. She didn't try to make herself seem heroic or misunderstood. Instead, she admitted she'd begun volunteering at a shelter, using what she had learned from her own mistakes to help other women recognize patterns of control. She said she wanted to be a voice that might prevent someone else from losing years to silence. Listening to her, I felt something I had never truly felt toward her before: admiration unclouded by longing. I told her what I had come to understand, that forgiveness for me wasn't about declaring the past acceptable. It was about releasing the fantasy that it could be rewritten. We couldn't fix what had been broken, but we could build something honest in its place. When we hugged, it felt like two adults meeting each other fully, not a child clinging to a mother who couldn't save her. Later that night, after most of the dishes were washed and leftovers were packed for Patricia to take to the shelter, I carried my son upstairs. He fell asleep quickly, curled around his blanket, unaware of how much he had changed the course of my life. Watching him in the quiet, I realized that everything that followed last Christmas had begun with my decision to protect him, even if it meant severing ties I once thought unbreakable. Emily's actions had been the spark, but my choices had been the fire that cleared the way for something new. I whispered to him that he had saved me not because he ever needed rescuing, but because loving him demanded I finally rescue myself. When I went back downstairs, Daniel was laughing with Maria and Margaret, while Patricia finished boxing up food to donate. Seeing them together, comfortable and unguarded, filled me with a sense of belonging I had never felt in my childhood home. Daniel wrapped his arms around me and wished me a Merry Christmas. For the first time in my life, those words didn't feel like an obligation. They felt like truth. After everyone left and the house quieted, Daniel and I sat together on the couch, looking at the tree that leaned slightly to the left because my son had insisted on rearranging the ornaments. It was imperfect and handmade and utterly beautiful. As I leaned against Daniel, I found myself saying aloud that last Christmas had nearly destroyed me. But this one had given something back. He asked what changed, and the answer came easily. I told him I had finally claimed my worth instead of waiting for anyone else to define it. I told him I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore, or the frightened woman trying to keep the peace. I was myself, fully and intentionally. When we finally turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I glanced once more at the lopsided tree glowing softly in the dark. It was real, and it was enough. That was the Christmas that finally saved me. After everything I endured and rebuilt, I finally understood that strength isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to rise even while afraid. The people who hurt me faced their consequences, but what truly saved me was choosing myself. Choosing truth, choosing peace, choosing to build a family defined by love instead of survival. My story is a reminder that our past does not decide our future. We do. Healing begins the moment we stop waiting for others to change and start becoming who we were meant to be. If this journey moved you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson spoke to you the most? I'd truly love to hear from you.